narratives are shaped by corporations and gatekeepers. Independent voices matter more than ever. Badlands Media brings together citizen journalists, researchers, and independent thinkers.
The truth is triggering.
Question the narrative. Explore the facts.
It's authenticity, courage, resilience.
Search for the truth others won't.
It's not about being first or being right.
The information war is changing.
It's about being authentic.
Embrace the friction.
Embrace the friction.
Shut the f*** up.
Authentically antagonizing. Join the movement.
I'm going to say how I feel.
Follow Badlands Media.
This is about the future.
The Badlands. What are the Badlands? Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
We were sleeping. I've been sleeping. I've been turning away from a truth I wanted not to face. There is a wound that won't heal at the center of the galaxy. There is a darkness reaching like rust into everything around us. We let it grow, and now it's here.
How many men have you killed, Willow?
I don't know.
50? 100? Countless.
Countless has a nice ring to it.
And how many lives have you saved?
500,000. Population of King's Landing. Tell me if your precious friendly commanded you to kill your own father and stand by while thousands of men, women, children burned alive, would you have done it? Would you have kept your oath then?
Our time has come. We prepared. We grew stronger. Were you rested in your cradle of power? You were trusted to lead the Republic. But you were deceived. You assumed no force could challenge you. And now, finally, we have returned.
The visions are clear now. I see possible futures all at once. Our enemies are all around us. And in so many futures they prevail. But I do see a way. There is a narrow way through. It's not a prophecy. It's a story that you keep telling, but it's not their story, it's yours. They deserve to be led by one of their own. What your people did to this world is heartbreaking.
We gave them something to hope for.
That's not hope! We have survived by hiding from them, by running from them. But they are the gatekeepers. They are guarding all the doors, they are holding all the keys, which means that sooner or later, someone is going to have to fight them.
I wish none of this had happened.
So do all that live to see such time, but that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. Forgive me. I did not see. I have failed you all. You will bring John. I do not know what strength is in my heart. I swear to you, I will not let the light city fall. Our people fail. Our people. Our people.
I wish you good fortune in the wars to come. And now it begins. No. Now it ends.
What's up, guys? Welcome to the narrative episode 74, the PsyOp of London, the show that will not make anybody upset, and the show that will be the objective, whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And tonight's guest is the type that I can sort of... It's a great sort of guest for me because this is the type of guy I bring on when I need to talk about something controversial within the silo of the truth community without anybody being able to be upset at me, because I can retroactively outsource all of my implied opinions to my guest, and anything that it seems like was kind of cool that he said, I can also imply that that was pretty much what I was leaning to the whole time. So that's pretty much what we're going to do tonight. I'll kind of give a little intro on where my head's at with this stuff. But before we do, I will thank one of our sponsors tonight. I hope you guys have been doing good. I think we've got a little bit of a phase shift, a little bit of an energy shift on the back of Trump's address last, what was that, Thursday night? A few days to marinate on it. And for once, even though I'm the narrative guy, as judging by the title of this show I do, I think the actuals that the U.S. government put out in the wake of the narrative deployment last week were bigger than the narrative deployment. And John Harold has been talking about this, and he's a curmudgeon. He's a professional curmudgeon. But he actually was more excited about what's going on lately when he dug into the actuals than the narrative. Also, random little aside, I always think about Lord of the Rings after watching the intro to this show, even though that intro would get us flagged on YouTube. The reason we go live on YouTube after that intro is because the whole show will be taken down if I play that intro, but I just can't quit it because Lord of the Rings. And I've got a few guys that grew up with that I watch fights with, and most of the time when they text me randomly on a Saturday, it's about whatever's going on in the UFC fights. This Saturday, however, about 1 out of 8 times when they text me, it's about something specific to Tolkien lore. And this weekend, we had a big text discussion about the 2v1 duel on the slopes of Mount Doom between Gil-galad, Elendil, the last king of Numenor, of course, obviously, and Sauron himself. And how, even though I'm a huge simp for Peter Jackson and what he did with those movies, perhaps the biggest missed opportunity in the Lord of the Rings trilogy was the filming of the duel between Gil-galad and Sauron, and the lack of that duel being in the final film. So I just want you guys to know kind of where I'm at. That's where I'm at heading into the show. Haven't thought about the lack of the Gil-galad versus Sauron duel in some time, but am thinking about it tonight. So heavy is my heart and psyche, but that's why we always have the source material. Okay, before I bring my guest in, we are brought to you tonight for I think the second week in a row by our friends. I am drinking it right now, mixed in with my coffee. I took the advice of some other Badlanders and mixed some of this in with my coffee. That is our friends at Cacao Bliss, or Earth Echo, and their product, Cacao Bliss. This episode is brought to you by Cacao Bliss from Earth Echo, a ceremonial-grade cacao drink with 7 superfoods that lower appetite, boost focus, and calm anxiety. What if the healthiest thing you could drink every morning tastes exactly like hot chocolate? Forget green smoothies and protein shakes. When prepared the right way, without fillers and processed junk, cacao is tremendously beneficial for your health. Researchers studied a tribe that drinks 5 cups of cacao a day and found they have heart problems 9 times less than Americans. Today's sponsor figured out how to bring that same drink to the U.S. The chocolate most of us grew up eating has been heavily processed, heated, and chemically treated until almost everything beneficial is gone. Studies show modern processing destroys up to 60% of cacao's active compounds, but raw ceremonial-grade cacao preserves those powerful nutrients called flavonols. That means 63 times more antioxidants than broccoli, plus high amounts of theobromine, which gives you up to 6 times longer-lasting energy than caffeine with no jitters. Cacao Bliss from Earth Echo starts with 100% ceremonial-grade cacao, combines it with 7 organic superfoods, including turmeric, cinnamon, MCT oil, monk fruit, and more. 1 scoop in hot water tastes like rich, creamy, hot chocolate. Learn more and get your special discounts and free shipping today at trycacaobliss.com/badlands. That's trycacaobliss.com/badlands. There was a bunch of words in that. Some of them I know, many of them I don't. I will just say it's really good. I said this 2 weeks ago. It's extremely good. It tastes good. And it does not taste like you're ODing on sugar, which is a big problem of mine. So Last time I just had it so I could abstain from coffee. This time I'm having it with coffee, and I do not regret my choice. Okay. Without further ado, tonight's guest, not the first time, but it's been kind of a long time, is the Badlands Canadian, Matt Ehret. How's it going, Matt?
Hey, Burning, I'm doing okay. Burning bright.
Yeah, who knows? Who knows?
I can't get used to it, man. I'm sorry. I've known you for 2 years. I just can't.
It's Mr. Bright, okay? Mr. Bright. If we're being formal, and I think you are.
We're in a
you're one
casual
of the more
modality,
formal.
you know?
Yeah, you're one of the more formal Badlanders that we've got around here. You've also been scrambling all around on different podcasts in the digital battle space. So what's been going on with you? What are you doing something specific? Has there been a tour? Or
Yeah, well, we just
what
released our
prompted all that?
documentary. We released a documentary called Black Sun Rising that we spent 5 months making. So I found myself, I got to bite the bullet and actually let people know that it exists. So I've gone out of my way to never say no when I'm requested to be on a podcast, which I'm trying to build up my power of boundary conditions. Usually I realized that I was like losing hair and getting too stressed because I was always saying yes. And then Cynthia was like, just calm down. Learn, you don't have to, right? Like you've never signed a contract saying you have to go on every podcast that approaches you. So that was a big revelation for me. And I think it put a few years out of my life. But then with the documentary, and we have a little book here, I'm going to show your audience.
Yeah.
This cool book that accompanies the documentary called
Is that a hardcover?
It's a hardcover, yeah. It's a
Damn.
hardcover. Yeah.
Now, Black Sun, that makes me think of the our friends in Ukraine, the freedom fighters over in Ukraine. Does that factor in at all to this narrative?
Well, this one deals a little bit more with the occult, subterranean black magicians behind the rise of fascism 1.0. So the first iteration, the Ukrainian fascists are kind of like fascist 3 4.0. This is like the first rendition
They're like
of the
hipster
thing.
fascists. Yeah, like yeah. I mean,
they have like garage bands and stuff. And, yeah.
Before you leave, let's get into more specifically about your documentary. We'll let people filter in before you get out of here. But besides that, I like having Matt on the show, and he's an interesting guy. There's been a topic lately that it's funny. Most of the people I have on the show, I'm interested in a specific topic. I bring them on because I've been reading a lot about the topic, and then I want to talk to them about it, right? This is a little different for me. I am a little unwieldy with the main topic I want to discuss tonight with Matt. That is the City of London topic. I named this episode The PsyOp of London. That's a little tongue-in-cheek, but that's kind of where my gut reaction is, which admittedly, I do not shy away from it. It is where I begin much of what passes as my analysis in the info war. I am not good at many things, but one of the things I am good at is recognizing narrative patterns when they start to crop up in seemingly disparate locations. This is a pattern I have noticed sort of threading its way, not just into the internet, but into the truth community, the MAGA community, the Badlands community. And I don't know a lot about it. I have tried to educate myself a little bit, but I know that Matt knows a good amount about this topic. That's kind of going to be our main topic in a little bit. We're going to talk about, I'm not here to shit on it. I'm not here to say anybody who wants to talk about the City of London theory, there's nothing there. There's something there. There's definitely something there. I brought a guy in tonight who knows there's something there. But whenever I see something being pushed very heavily and in a very coordinated manner, I always default to why. Why is this being pushed? Are there any consequences to this being pushed? And that's kind of what I want to get into in a little while. But we're going to kind of lead into that and kind of perfectly, Matt had agreed to come on a week ago before Trump's address. But Trump's address last Thursday kind of will actually be a smooth rail into this topic. But before we get into City of London and any of that kind of stuff, Trump had his address Thursday night. He discussed election fraud. He was fairly vague. He's been talking about this stuff for 6 years for many of us. Our own John Harold has stated that after the speech, the documents he's been looking into and some of the conversations that I've had, certainly, some of us kind of have the feeling that actually this is the rare case where maybe the press conference undersold what was being discussed here, and that this community has been talking about election fraud for years and years, right? But we've now got the Department of Justice releasing, a lot more than they've released in the past about this kind of stuff. There was a few vectors of attack that the US government is alleging took place in 2020 and ostensibly before and maybe since on elections. We can get into a couple of those to lead into the City of London topic, but I'm just wondering if you've had a chance to kind of take stock of what Trump said, of anything that's been released since then. Just how do you feel about last week's deployment, just in general?
Yeah, it's difficult to draw any strong conclusions. I know, obviously, my first reaction, being somebody who has spent a lot of time following closely China and the various networks that have infiltrated China as a deep state, and then the patriots within China who have actually done a very, very valiant job at battling this thing, at extricating it, purging the swamp. Millions have gone to prison in China for being traitors, assets of the West, of the Wall Street, even the London and Dutch behemoth ancient companies that have built up these huge systems of control that have penetrated into China since the 90s. I was a little bit disturbed by the choice of words used to really focus all of the attention on the particular state actor of China specifically, whereas I know that the type of agencies that really did play the leading role in the election interference, I would bring in this case, the City of London actors definitely,
which is kind of ironic.
Yeah. I mean, I've done a lot of work. I've written many chapters from my book on the Anglo Venetian roots of the deep state, on the figure of Mark Malloch Brown and his Smartmatics, his control over Smartmatic, its overlap with Dominion voting, the type of provable operations that this agency has done. Lord Mark Malloch Brown, by the way, is currently the president of Open Society. He's been working with Soros since the early 90s at the balkanization of Russia. He got into the election interference game back in the 80s, ensuring that this nationalist leader, Marcos, was overthrown in Philippines using, again, completely fraudulent shenanigans, not that different from what was done as far as vote dump, ballot dumping, just artificially making up ballots, getting dead people to vote, all of this stuff. And they've done this in Georgia. They've done this all over the world. So, I mean, it's provable that there has been tons of election interference. We saw the documentary of 2000 Mules. I think it's been proven. A lot of this is open source. So it's good to get the conversation going. I haven't really looked through all of the details like John had. But did you find anything in there that was presented to your attention so far that indicates that China was behind in any way the manipulation of the elections?
So my personal leaning, and we've talked about this a little bit. I never pretend that I came up with this on my own, but in the Q drops that were influential on me 10 years ago, there was a suggestion that perhaps President Trump was working with two specific men against a globalist deep state, and those two men were Vladimir Putin of Russia and Xi Jinping of China. And there's obviously in the last 10 years been many different sort of theories and sub-theories and, Ouroboros patterns in the truth community and MAGA, all that kind of stuff. But for me, the theory of Trump working with foreign leaders that have been branded as our adversaries just could not get out of my mind. I wrote back 4 years ago the Righteous Russia series. I've said a million times that's not meant to be a historically accurate factual series. The Righteous Russia series, the intent of it was an examination from an American's perspective of the narrative of the Russian to the American. and contrasting that or comparing that to the narrative of the MAGA American to the American, and seeing how many similarities there are in how those narratives have been run. A couple years later, or about a year later, so 2021, 22 is when I did the bulk of my research into Russia. 23 and 24, certainly it's more unwieldy to me, but I tried to do a good amount of research into Xi Jinping's China. And I say that for a reason, as you just said. So my leaning on this stuff comes through coloring of fifth gen warfare. I do believe at my core that Donald Trump is, if he's not allies with Putin and Xi, I think they have common enemies. I feel pretty confident based on how they have orbited the sort of geopolitical game board that they do have common enemies. Xi and Putin, I think, are a lot more direct with their visions for what they see as the future of multipolarity, and that's the word that those two use. Donald Trump, by the way, just started using the term multipolarity in 2025, which I thought was very notable because I have actually argued to this audience that Putin and Xi are ahead of Trump on this sovereign alliance kind of narrative I've been tracking. But that's where my leaning is. I coined the phrase sovereign alliance. I coined the term. I don't believe it only encompasses the US, Russia, and China, but I do believe that those are the pillars. I think without them, without all three of them on board, without all three leaderships on board, you don't get a shift change and a paradigm change on a global scale. You just don't. If you have one of those three that is not just not on board, but diametrically opposed to the other two, you've got the very sort of unipolar structure or controlled opposition dynamic structure that the globalists have relied on the entire time. So that is just full disclosure, my leaning. So when I see Trump talking about the CCP and China, my leaning is that he is talking about this stuff as sort of an in and a narrative translation layer, because it's very easy to discuss interference in an American election through foreign interference from a narrative perspective. From an actual perspective, which is more the purview of somebody like John at Badlands, there's at least some suggestion that as commander-in-chief, if you are going to take a hard look at elections in a way that many of us at Badlands have wanted them to do for years, and if Congress and maybe even the U.S. court system, the other two co-equal branches, are not really holding up their end of the bargain, which I believe has been proven beyond a reasonable doubt. I do not think Congress is our friend. Then how can you give the commander-in-chief the purview to do something about the American election system? One of our sub-theories has been, if you can translate this narrative through foreign interference, the sort of powers of the president, it's more difficult to interfere with what he wants to do. But all of that said, I do not believe that Xi Jinping's China was trying to steal the 2020 election. There's been too much, even though they fought a very serious trade war with each other. One of the things I've pointed out to this audience many times is that, by the way, Trump is only basically creating détente on a trade level with Xi Jinping. He's not doing that with Europe. He's not doing that with Canada or Mexico. So I think that Trump and Xi get along a lot better than their public personas would have people think. I do not think Xi Jinping was trying to steal the 2020 election. But I'm curious what you think, and I'm curious specifically through the lens of U.S. intelligence and Western intelligence. Because to me, that was some of the big stuff that's in these documents is what we've theorized for years is the role of Western intelligence in the undermining and subversion of the U.S. election system, right? So to me, a lot of that stuff's coming out in these documents, and I think, well, who wants us to believe that China is stealing our elections? And to me, I lean toward, well, I think Western intelligence really wants us to come away with that as the final impression. So I can't pretend I can prove it, but I think the China thing is a red herring. And what I'm hoping is this is the beginning of sort of an unwind of Western intelligence is saying that China is trying to steal our elections, but that it might be a lot closer to the house than most Americans would like to believe.
Yeah. Well, I think that your instincts are correct. And I mean, there does seem to be a certain dis intentionally disjointed nature to the choice of imposing this particular narrative on China all of a sudden out of the blue. I've never heard this being done in this way so loudly and in coordination with what's his name from the department. Is it the Department of uh there's another, no, it's a State Department official. I forgot his name. I have his little video where he also gave a press conference saying that Iran is behind the election interference in 2020. I've got the video. Was that?
The Department of State, you said?
Yeah, the State Department. Here, I've got actually here the video. Let me just open it up here just to have be reminded of this person's name.
Is it Rubio?
No, it wasn't Rubio. It was the guy with the beard. It's not even opening on me. But there's another figure high up in the U.S. State Department who was also giving a speech a day before Trump gave his speech, and I'll find it before this thing's out, saying that it was in Iran. Iran was behind. He didn't even bring up China once. He was just like Iran, as a state, was behind the U.S. election interference, which again seems to have almost been a bit of a parody on the type of narrative that the Democrats had used against Russia being behind all of the problems behind the 2016 election interference. It's like they literally took the exact same script that was all Russia did it. Russia's using Trump as their puppet, and then just inverted the script or redirected it towards China. They'd already been doing it, we've heard, towards Venezuela earlier on. So Venezuela, Iran, China, and ignoring everything which has come to the surface pertaining to, as you said, the very provable role of deep state intelligence agencies that have been behind the infiltration of our government, the murder of John F. Kennedy, the organization of the entire drug organized crime syndicates that were behind the rampant drug problems of the 1960s, 70s, 80s that came out of MK Ultra, another CIA operation. The physical production systems of opium that went into the heroin, into the veins of hippies, and then young broken men coming back from Vietnam, doped up because they had to do unhuman things. The entire physical infrastructure in Thailand, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia was overseen and managed by a mixture of the KMT, the Kuomintang, Taiwanese assets of Chiang Kai-shek, who had modeled himself on as a Asian fascist. His nephew was the head of the Chinese Nazi Party. That's actually a thing, and he was the KMT, this branch of the CIA, the Lucky Luciano crime family, was literally one and the same thing from the 50s on, or actually from the late 40s onward, when Lucky Luciano was let out of prison, installed in Sicily under the protection of Alan Dulles and the CIA to rebuild his entire family, his entire organized crime thing, enmeshed with the Korskin Mafia, with the KMT, and all of this was behind. This is the Green Gang. This is the KMT, Green Gang of Taiwan. They did this, and they had to refine the labs to refine it to send they brought it in via the Golden Triangle into North America. They had the Air America program to create the physical airplanes, the physical infrastructure to coordinate this as a nominally civilian front group. But we now know was always CIA. This is where they made a movie with Mel Gibson and Robert Downey Jr., which wasn't a bad movie in the 80s. On it was called Air America, right?
I never saw that actually.
It was decent. It was one of these like limited hangout things, kind of like The Men Who Stare at Goats.
We did that recently on Story Hour. Me and Chris, we did it like 2 months ago. The Men Who Stare at Goats.
Ooh, you did?
Yeah. But we'll have to do the. I didn't even know about that one with Gibson and Downey.
Yeah. And a lot of this grew out of the Flying Tigers operation of Claire Chenot. Claire Chenot had one of his lieutenants by the name of John Birch, who they made an entire martyr out of and built up this entire narrative concocting operation to spin the very real fact of foreign conspiracies out to destroy the American Revolution. That was a very provable real fact. But then the John Birch Society, coming out of this entire CIA, KMT, mafia connected, integrated thing, they captured it and then respun it towards it's all the commies, it's all the Chi coms, it's all the Ruskies, and they just created this brain rot, which really infected their target audience, which were like typically conservative, Christian-minded Americans, where that's how they crafted their narrative, was to better be absorbed into that part of the zeitgeist, which is where Alex Jones was really groomed out of. His uncle was a leading figure within the John Birch Society. He had the John Birch Society president on just a little while ago to help Americans understand that it's not even though Jones has been speaking about the occult underground, the Bohemian Grove, the Freemasonic agencies. He's been doing that as a career for like 30 years. But
since
he's like,
90s.
no, it's really the Chi-coms out to get us.
Yeah.
You know better. So, or you're confused as hell. And I think that's my fear, is that there's a lot of people who today are just hearing what Trump is saying. They haven't done the mind work to properly appreciate the topography of the intelligence shenanigans that have been behind all of America's problems and the world's problems.
Yeah.
And they're already kind of weaponized, from like Wuhan lab stuff to China's behind the fentanyl stuff, to everything is China. China's controlling our food production, our food supply. It's all China. It's like, no, that's Canada. Canada controls 30% of the foreign, that's 30% of the foreign-owned farmland in America is controlled by Canada, which is run by Malthusians who do want to destroy America and kill Americans. That's Canada.
And now they're invading our airspace, literally, at this point, which is pretty ridiculous. I don't know how much you have to do with that or not. I think this might be who you were talking about a few minutes ago, Mark Wayne Mullen, DHS. I'll just play a little bit of this. This is him talking about Iran, apparently. I don't know if he says anything. What's going on?
We'll make sure that we make those states a priority to look at who voted in their states and hold then the election officials accountable. If the election officials, once we gave them the information they need to secure their elections, and they chose not to, then those individuals can also be held accountable by fines, by penalties, and even, depending on how far it goes, prison time.
Iran, there it is. Iran tried to...
We know that Iran hacked our state voter files and attempted to compromise, is the best word I can use, our systems where military...
It's too retarded. I can't take it. I can't take it. But this is why these are interesting discussions, because I agree with you completely on this. I'm not saying we disagree on the Trump angle, but you're a skeptic, which is good, which is why I like having you on. I view these things, as I said, through the framework of the sovereign alliance theory, of which I think Trump is a major part. I don't claim that he is the anchor of it. Now, I think realistically, any sovereign alliance would have to be anchored in some way by the United States, just from a pure power perspective. No matter how powerful China has become, no matter how powerful Russia has become, or NATO, etc., there's a reason that I think the globalists have always required the US, if not fully on board, then certainly not off board, whatever they're trying to implement. We have the most powerful military. If you've got the US military on board, you basically have carte blanche. You can do whatever you want on the global battle space. The reason, I don't think it's just MAGA hopium, and again, I'm a former liberal, so I didn't always have MAGA Trump brain. The reason I think it's reasonable to assume that Trump is working with these players is in between all the noise of ma Russia, ma China, ma Iran, pick your ma North Korea, Trump always finds a way to sign deals or make agreements with these quote-unquote axis. I had said in 2025 in one of my Substack articles, the new axis. I had named the new axis of Russia, China, and Iran. And I said, watch for the mainstream media to start branding these three countries the new axis, basically. Trump always finds a way to make deals with them while seemingly at war with them. With Iran, it's a kinetic war right now. I have my theories on how kinetic that war is because neither side seems to be able to agree on how kinetic it is. Neither side seems to be able to agree right now on whether or not the Ayatollah is a real person. With Russia, we have all this posturing, and yet I've noted a pattern that I bring up anytime on this show. The viewers can attest. Anytime Trump has a phone call with either Xi Jinping or Vladimir Putin, which tend to be great from what all the leaders say, the next week is usually chock full of anti-narratives between those two countries. We had this between Trump and Putin on July 4th, and then the next week we had all this posturing of Trump rearming Ukraine against Russia. Now, maybe that's true, maybe it's not. I don't think it's true, but I consider this similarly when I look at the China narrative. Trump, and CanCon posted about this as well. I've got him hooked onto the Sovereign Alliance Hopium. Just one day before Trump did this press conference in which he sort of said that China stole the election, he posted a bunch of pictures of him and Xi Jinping shaking hands and being friendly. Now, of course, you can read that as he's taunting Xi in some way. I read it a little bit differently. When I look at mentions, whether you're talking about Q drops or Trump disclosures of Iran, of China, I kind of plug those into like a, if you're in a Word document and you go find all, change all. I do that in my mind whenever I see Iran in like State Department documents or China, and I do replace all with CIA or MI6. And I don't think that Trump doesn't know this. And I think one of the tells that he does know this is that in the midst of what we are supposed to believe is this new posture toward China, does it seem like Trump is feeling good about the Western allies? Does it seem like he's feeling good about Western intelligence, about MI6, about England, about NATO? Is he feeling good about China and NAFTA and all that kind of stuff? The only country in the new Trump administration that we've actually got a deal with on trade is China, even though we've been fighting a trade war with them. And he's signed no such deals with Canada or England or Germany or beyond. So I do think a lot of this stuff is PsyOps. The question, though, would be to argue against what I'm saying or to try to, basically test it, would be why. And as I hinted at sort of at the start of the show, I've used a term called narrative shielding for years, where I've said, if you're waging a fifth generation information war, and if the Sovereign Alliance theory is broadly correct, which is that Trump and Xi and Putin have a common understanding and know who they're up against, well, who are they up against? They're up against what all three of them call the invisible enemy in their own languages. All three of them have acknowledged that Western intelligence have basically been at the root of a lot of their country's problems. So how do you kind of compete in a battle space that's defined by fighting against your own intelligence apparatus? And I wonder, I really look at some of these things like the election fraud disclosure, and to me, and you do a lot of commentary on this in your own world in terms of just how subversive elements within the alternative media are. We all know, watching a show like this, that the mainstream media is corrupt and that they're essentially intel assets. Trump is attempting to sanction these intel assets within the United States. Putin and Xi have done the same thing in their countries ahead of Trump with their media apparatus. They've basically conflated those and joined those together with anti-intelligence, or better word would be an insurgency. They've pretty much treated the media as an insurgency. But what we talk about sometimes in this world is some of these MAGA influencers, some of these truther groups, it feels like those are NGO adjacent, super PAC adjacent, intelligence adjacent. And I sometimes look at when Trump talks, when he gilds things in the language of China did this and Russia did this and Iran did this. He gets all these alternative media, supposedly MAGA voices to jump on the narrative and say, you know, whether you're talking about Turning Point USA or the Daily Wire or whatever, they all jump in because they're like, China did it. It was all China, right? Like you said earlier, it's the new Russia, it's the new China. So what happens in a couple of months when Trump rug pulls that? And, you know, you can timestamp this and see if I'm right about this, but when Trump rug pulls that and allows the disclosures to come out and then starts focusing and going, you know, maybe it wasn't the Chinese. Maybe it was United States intelligence because they were named in his disclosures, as was the US media. So that's where I kind of look at some of this and say, is the China sort of thing a way of getting it into the zeitgeist and saying, oh, a foreign enemy subverted US elections, when if we unwind that thread, it's much more likely that, again, it's not China at all, but it might be an enemy that's been affecting both countries.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it, and I hope you're right. I really, really do hope you're right that this is used as a foil or as a way to focus people's attention to have that conversation, and then when you get a bit of lockstep going and a bit of agreement on this is a topic we should all be pushing on. Now, when the actual core evidence is brought to the surface, you could say, oh, all of this fiery language that was directed towards this peer competitor that you might have thought was your enemy is actually, it's looking more and more like it's closer to home. That would be a nice rug pull. It would be a very nice surprise. I guess for me, part of what I would criticize about the approach, and I agree with you as well, that if we're going to get some form of global change that is like harmonizable, coordinated in a way that's not New World Order-esque, if
Yeah.
there's different ways of getting world change. Mark Malloch
Right.
Brown was behind the R2P, their responsibility to protect. He was the Secretary General or the Assistant Secretary General of the UN. So these types of globalists, they have their own idea. So does Carney. But theirs is based upon an idea of imposing a new system founded upon entropy, the reward for activity which diminishes the ability to support human life on the earth. That's what it's always been. It's always been wired towards, different types of techno-feudalism. That accompanies a necessary corollary for their idea of a new world order, which involves keeping the slaves fighting each other. So maximize always the dialectics into conflicts as much as possible in a race for diminishing returns. So get everybody to define themselves in tribal ways around their religion, their language, their skin color, whatever, secondary feature of being a human is what you want to organize this group versus that group, to see the other as something to be a threat that you could even see yourself killing as a subhuman entity, because it's another tribe. They have another word for God. They have another word, another type of culture. So you can't really have that love and respect, that kind of Christian piety that you would think all humans do merit. That sentiment. So that's how the oligarchy has always wired their target audience. And so if we're going to get something which allows for a change in system, while at the same time rejecting those core doctrines of totalitarian technocratic control over a world of diminishing returns, as we shut off the levers of food production, of energy, of water availability, as we increase the tendency towards forever wars, then you need to have this US, Russia, China collaboration as powers that could together do this. So I agree with you on that as well. If you don't get the United States in, it gets messy. So my hope, when I'm looking at the world, as far as like, where do I hook my reasonable hope on? I don't like just putting it on blind faith, but one of the practical material things is what I've written about quite a bit for Badlands Media on the Belt and Road Initiative, as far as something which has accomplished an alternative way of thinking about finance, banking, where money under the state banking system of China has been used to finance not speculation, but rather building real things in the real world that lift people from a lower standard to a higher standard of life. And people could like look at these industrial corridors, these high-speed rail networks, the interconnectivity. It's quite inspiring, and it's been going on since 2013 and accelerating. But it's been creating it's been this. What it's done is it's created a foundation, a glue around which healing has been able to occur between Saudi Arabia and Iran, which both together played big roles in the Belt and Road Initiative, but they also had their diplomatic lines, their bridges destroyed by design since the 2016 period when Saudi Arabia killed a famous Iranian cleric and executed a bunch of his followers too. That just destroyed all relations. But then in 2023, the bridge building began because they were like, well, look, we're both playing a big role. We could both prosper quite a bit by working together. And we've got this BRI program where China's investing in nuclear power. Russia's wanting to help us as well in nuclear energy in Iran, which they've begun doing, in Egypt, which joined the BRICS. So it's like, that's been a really good thing. So when I'm looking at, and maybe it's not, I don't treat the US government under any president, including Trump, as a behemoth. That's all in lockstep, right? So the choice to take the approach that I've seen in Iran, where infrastructure, core BRI infrastructure, rail lines to China have been attacked. The Chabahar port, the port of Bandar Abbas on the southern ports of Iran, which are key in the north-south transportation corridor between India and Russia and Iran, that's been attacked. There's all of these points where I'm like, that's not a great strategy for me. Like if you wanted to work, the way that the US would be a great partner would be to participate and bring its talents to the BRI spirit that's already got like 135 countries signed on to MOUs. Attacking it and destabilizing the BRI, destabilizing the rail corridors of Eurasia, for me is like not a wise thing to do. It's not going to create long-term trust. And maybe it can be undone. I hope it can be undone, but it's just it causes me to have a lot of trepidation going into these hypotheses of what's behind the planning and in the backroom discussions.
I totally get that, and again, obviously I'm looking at this stuff through a certain lens. I think a lot of the news we're being told about is fake. Obviously, many people do, but we always have to check ourselves in terms of like, what am I just not refusing to accept because of my preconceived notions. That said, I think there's a lot of contradictions in the global battle space in terms of the relations between some of these nations that we're told about, the do as I say, not as I do type of thing, in a good way. I mean, some of that as an example, Trump has no plans to punish China, even though he just blamed the communist government for meddling in the 2020 election. So, this is a lot of the mainstream media is starting to write some hit pieces, and I bet you're going to see a lot more of this coming week, of the media trying to put pressure on Trump to take action against China, and I guarantee you he is not going to do that, which starts to beg the question, if you just gave a presidential address about how China stole an election, why are you not doing anything about China? Why instead are you trying to sanction American media companies and that sort of thing? So that will be like yet to be seen. Smaller points. Why Azerbaijan is locking in a new 2-year plan with Moscow after backing Ukraine. We just had Trump meet, I believe, with the leader of Azerbaijan. They called each other peacemakers. Said that they're going to be signing deals on, you mentioned, an energy corridor. Ghost and I, actually, your buddy Ghost there, we've had a few conversations recently about that energy corridor, the BRI that you've been talking about for years. And, before you know it, somewhat sneakily, Donald Trump's talking to a lot of those guys. And all of a sudden, Donald Trump has the leader of Iraq in his Oval Office, and they're best friends, right? Iraq and the United States. Who would have thought? And then you've got the new leader of Syria, the so-called leader of Syria, which is quite an important little puzzle piece in that region. You've got Russia several years ago stopping a coup in Kazakhstan to preserve this. So that's where sometimes I look at the narrative of what these leaders are saying. Okay, the US is posturing, Russia's posturing, China's posturing. But then on an actual level, all the deals that are being done, all the military action, a lot of it, all three of them seem to be clearing out this central corridor in Central Asia. And the people, to me, that look the most upset about that is Ukraine, but more importantly is Europe, Western Europe, who seem very upset about the idea of new energy railways and pipelines circumventing their kind of previous areas of control. So that's part of what I look at sometimes. It's not just what's Trump saying in a press conference, but well, he's saying this stuff in a press conference. Okay, what was he saying about the Afghans 2 years ago, and now like we're totally good? And what was he saying about Iraq? And what was he saying about Syria? And now he's got these guys in the Oval Office. Meanwhile, he talks about, I've said many times on this show, Trump never says the word allies when it comes to the Western allies, their traditional allies, without prefacing it with, quote, so-called. He calls them our so-called allies. And so sometimes I think you got to play the opposite game a little bit, where Trump has this adversarial posture toward countries in the Middle East, toward Russia, toward China, but then it's deal after deal after deal after deal with all those players. Meanwhile, he has this supposedly friendly rapport with Canada, with England, with Germany, with France, and yet he calls them our so-called allies, and he doesn't seem to be willing to help them out in any way. So, it's an interesting kind of balancing. But before we get into the City of London stuff, I did want one more kind of take from you just generally on China, on where, for this audience, I haven't done a big deep dive on the narrative on China, so maybe I have to have you back on for that. But just generally speaking, obviously many people watching this show have the general framework that Donald Trump is basically being combated by a domestic insurgency. Whether you like him or not, they're pretty open about that. That's not really even controversial to say anymore, that there is an insurgency against Donald Trump, whether it's in the intel community, the media, or within the government itself of the United States. As you said, it's not a monolith. I don't think a lot of MAGA understands that is the case or has been the case in China for the last 10 years preceding Trump. And, it's hard to do a short version of that, but if you have a general way of framing that.
Yeah, we can do like a teaser, I guess. I asked John a few months back if I could do a show because my Wednesdays blew up on me. So every Monday night I do a show called Breaking Free of PsyOps. And the thing that I had in the forefront of my mind was dealing with the PsyOp that China is America's core nemesis. And there's just so many there's so many narratives that have been spun by creative writers within intelligence over the past, I would say, especially 10 years. Maybe it's gotten worse in the last 4 years. About China's behind all of our problems. Literally every problem that America is facing can be boiled down to, there's a way to spin it to make China the villain. So I was like, I want to deal with that over the course of every week, and also Satanists. The actual very provable organized role of Satanists that are at the core of a lot of these intelligence agencies, including the seeding, the creation of the Skull and Bones back in the early 19th century. That was created by, a leading Russell family, an Anglo Opium family of America that was always tied to the idea that the revolution of 1776 was the wrong thing to do. And that our wealth, as his family's wealth, was better accrued through working with the British Empire in creating the international drug economy around the Opium Wars. So it's an opium family. As a lot of the Eastern establishment, Boston Brahmin, New York families, the Lamonts, the high families, in America, a lot of their wealth,
like the Brights.
Yeah,
we kind of run Boston these days, but in those days we didn't quite yet.
The Illuminati, the bright Illuminati, right? The illuminated ones. Actually, I saw my family crest. My grandpa paid some guy in the 70s to do like one of these family trees. And back then they didn't have the internet and stuff, so I guess he had to like really pay somebody like as an investigative reporter to go into different archives in Europe and stuff. And he finally found like this crest that I still have somewhere of like this really disturbing crest of this 12th century Ehret clan
wow.
of like a snake eating its own tail around some weird like super weird coat of arms that is full of not like cult symbolism that I'm not comfortable with at all. But
That
anyway,
stuff's pretty wild. I don't know how much of
yeah,
it is accurate. I always just, unfortunately, once you become a conspiracy theorist, you're like, what if this is real and what if it is fake? But it is cool to go down those rabbit holes and be like, my clan was what? And we were related to what? And then you just start going back.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
I mean, you'll find I do believe Plato was right when he said that if you go further back in anybody's family trees, you will find kings and slaves. So it's probably to a
Yeah.
certain degree true of all of us. Um, but yeah, so the China thing is really important. And my wife actually right now, Cynthia, she's writing a book and we're about to make a documentary. She's producing, she's taken some of the leads that I presented in my show and taken it to another level as far as like, what is the China social credit system? Is there a China social credit system? The answer is no, there isn't actually,
That's
but
what we're told about over here, right? It's like you walk across the street and
yeah.
Big Brother is scanning your face, and then
Yeah, or like
they
you
make
go
it
to
so
the
you
Epoch
can't buy
Times
groceries.
website in China, and all of a sudden your social credit score goes down. You can't get
Right.
on the subway to get back home or whatever. Your
Yeah.
kids can't go to school. No, this is make believe, and I go through that and pointed out that there was a real effort on the part of some private agencies that were trying to bring this into China in the 2000 in like 2011, 12, all the way to 19. And that was Tencent, that was Alibaba, Alipay, Ant Group. They're all the same. They're all run by two private cartels. Those two things you could prove are actually run. One has the headquarters in the British Cayman Islands. It's not even Chinese.
Yeah.
Um, that's the one that's owned by Jack Ma, who was taken down. He's a
Oh
World
yeah.
Economic Forum trustee who called for
Hmm.
an overthrow of the Chinese banking system in 2020 publicly. And 3 days later, he was disappeared. And he only was allowed to basically teach. People were like, "Oh, did he die? Did he get killed?" Well, he was basically installed. He's told to go to one of his mansions under basically house arrest that he could teach high school classes. That was all he could do. He lost all powers and privilege. The Chinese took full control over his. They created something out of thin air called the golden share. So China, as a government, said, "Okay, we're actually gonna get 1% share in this company, this Alibaba Ant Group company, and but it's called the golden share. So basically, we're the emperor.
Yeah.
Anything you want to do, you got to go through the golden share owner from now on. So it's a big leash, and they did the same thing to Tencent, which was created in the 90s by a Goldman Sachs operative by the name of Martin Lau, who's still
Who are
unfortunately.
now infiltrating Western video games as their main cultural appropriation vector,
You got
by the
it.
way. Yeah.
Yes, EB Games and
Hmm.
yeah, exactly. Arcane, like that fantastic.
Yep.
Uh, you've seen the Arcane on
Oh yeah.
Netflix, right? Yeah,
Yep.
really well done. Um, but they're the ones who run all of that, so they're doing a reverse engine. But at the same time, the whole thing was always Goldman Sachs from the get go. And one of the key guys who runs Alibaba as well is a New York-based Taiwanese billionaire named Joseph Tsai. He can't even go to China really. Like he's in New York. He owns like a basketball team, and he's a big investor in like the Stanford and Yale neuro cybernetics groups. So he's
Hmm.
part of this whole Stargate operation, and that's actually what Cynthia discovered that I didn't even know in my presentation. I was not aware that these agencies are actually run by the same open AI Stargate groups. There's a whole network, Japan SoftBank, that owns 40% of the Stargate operation, along with the same 40% of OpenAI. Japan's SoftBank is run by a guy who's a Berkeley operative. He was brought in as a Japanese cybernetics freak in the 70s into Berkeley. He was processed there, initiated or whatever, and then was installed back into Japan to create this SoftBank thing, which is not Japanese. It's actually run by this same Stargate operation that's inside of the United States. This is what was doing the MK Ultra Monarch mind control operations on like remote viewing, abusing a lot of children along the way, working with a lot of the remote viewing cults. The Edgar Casey cults were all absorbed by this thing. Parents who were part of these cults were giving up their kids to Stargate operations to do like spoon bending and goat heart blowing up experiments and remote viewing things. But that thing got a rebranding more recently, and I don't see that as friendly to the U.S. interest at all. But that's what's behind the thing that China's been battling inside of its own country. That's also why it's not even just that, and you could prove that. And Cynthia's doing a great job pointing out the 5 million officials who have been imprisoned, who have been kicked out, who are all representing these interests. But also going back to the 80s, like there have been so many waves of effort to bring in a full-blown perestroika-like privatization into China, like they did in Russia in the 90s. That was done. Soros had his own right, like his own asset, Zhao Ziyang, who was made Secretary General of China, the most powerful position you could have in China. This guy became that from 87 to 89. He's the one who was being positioned at Tiananmen Square, which wasn't even a massacre. It was more of a color revolutionary regime change operation that failed, where Soros and the CIA were working to overthrow China. And this guy, Zhao Ziyang, who had a think tank with George Soros in China, the Secretary General of China had a think tank with George Soros, called the Society for the Reform and Opening Up of China. It's that bad. But it failed. The Chinese, unlike the Russians, were a little bit too quick and were able to nip it in the bud. And so they didn't have to go through what the Russians suffered with balkanization, privatization of everything under Al Gore and Strobe Talbot and Soros and Jeffrey Sachs, who had their way with pillaging Russia. But it's been an ongoing battle. They were never able with China. It's always been this kind of like dance. They've been battered for a century under the Opium Wars, all the way up until Franklin Roosevelt forced the British to say, okay, you have to let China go. You can't keep holding it as an asset. And the British at the time needed the U.S. participation in the war, so they had to go along with what FDR was saying. But it was still a fight. Even after FDR died, the British didn't want to let go, and so there was still a battle. But it was a century of multi-generational destruction of their culture, of their people. It was degrading what happened to them all the way up until 1950, and they were coming from a place of bad weakness, and so they've always been trying to figure out how do they learn how to rebuild, knowing that there are these assets, these agents, even around Mao. There were Western-directed agents who were very nefarious, as well as the KMT that went to Taiwan. So it's a den of vipers, and it's just been remarkable to watch their progress as they've been able to take, I think, a lot of their 5,000-year-old civilization, and they actually take lessons of things that happened in the Tang Dynasty and apply it for practical purposes for problem solving. So when people say, "Oh, yeah, it's a communist behemoth," it's not a communist behemoth. No, like my wife, I was listening to a point she made on the Duran the other day. She says it's true. Like, people don't wake up in China thinking, okay, what would Marx want to do? What would Marx do today? They're not ideologically Marxists. They're pragmatists informed by 5,000 years of their history. There's a Confucian Renaissance going on. It's very vibrant in their culture. And then there's what they choose to take out of what they understand communism or Marxism to be that works, and they leave what doesn't work. So it's a very pragmatic oriented mindset. And some of them do know more about the proper American system than Americans do. Like, they apply. That's been as I've measured in my writings, some of the biggest victories and successes of China's economic maneuvering came through an appreciation for what America did when the proper American system was activated under Lincoln, through the greenback system and state treasury issued securities tied to specific big mega projects like the Transcontinental Railway, which the Chinese study this kind of stuff and they apply it, as they've done, to different aspects of their BRI. So it's ironically, a lot of the best of what made America good that is making China successful in a lot of its fights. So that's the teaser.
I mean, a lot of what and again, I've done way less research on China than on Russia, but what research I have done, I was fascinated by what Xi Jinping, I don't know if he named it this, but his administration named it the Tigers and Flies campaign. And, I know it sounds so simple, but this audience, what's so funny is this audience of not just MAGA people, but like truthers, like MAGA people who don't just watch Fox News, but who try to figure stuff out. They watch shows like this, they watch shows like yours, they do their own research and writing. They're always in our comments, sending us stuff, sending us emails. I looked at this, I looked at that. They're first principles reasoners. They're trying to figure out what's going on, even if they're coming from an American perspective. And yet, I think that sometimes we, the collective we, sort of have a hard time framing things from the foreign lens. I'm not even saying that through like, oh, we're ignorant Americans. I more mean from a logical, a logos first principles perspective. Most of the people watching this show, 99% of what they talk about from a conspiracy lens and from a just daily info war, as we would call it, fifth generation warfare lens. When you're talking about the deep state in this audience, if you're a Badlander, are you usually talking about somebody from China or Russia, or are you usually talking about somebody in the United States government? Right? Like, sometimes it really is that simple to just check yourself a little bit, like I did a few years ago, and say, hold on. Before I rush to China bad, Russia bad, this bad, that bad, am I spending 99% of my time explaining to people how half of the US government or more are running an anti-constitutional insurgency against the Republic?
Right.
If so, which I think is apt and reasonable and true, then you have to be able to play that game with these other nations, right? So when somebody like, from a foreign lens, from a foreign propaganda lens, if you're in England, for example, if you're in Germany, if you're in Canada, actually, might be a better example. My wife, the former Canadian. When you go up there and you watch Canadian TV or European TV, what are they told about what Donald Trump is doing? They might be being shown speeches where Donald Trump is claiming that there's an American deep state that's out to get him. But that's how it's framed to Canadians and Brits, right? It's framed like this conspiratorial, paranoid, delusional strongman of a dictator thinks that there's a deep state in his government. Well, that's what Americans are told about Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin. When they get up and they say, and Xi, I think, is a little more subtle. He's a really interesting cat in terms of just how he communicates. I find it fascinating. Very different than Trump, obviously, but very different from Putin as well.
It's catered to the Chinese,
how they see things,
complex, right? They have it's a society of emperor, and so he's got the imperial disposition, very subdued.
Yep. Yeah. Whereas, but what's funny though is I think that you can read between the lines with him. It took me longer with him. Whereas with somebody like Putin, Putin is not emotional like Trump is. Trump is very bombastic, very American. But Putin is strong when he gives speeches. I mean, he straight up, he just says, he says things in a way I wish Trump would say things. Or that a lot of us at Badlands wish Trump would just come out and say, the CIA stole the 2020 election. And they did it on behalf of these people. And the media helped them. That's the type of stuff that Putin will just get up and say. I mean, this is a guy that gets up in front of the Russian people and says that the West is run by a satanic cabal that's infiltrated the United States government, which everybody in this audience agrees with. So then when you look at that and you look at Xi Jinping and he names something Tigers and Flies campaign, as you referenced earlier, from my research, Xi has arrested, or his administration, his regime has arrested more traitors to the nationalist vision than any world leader that we've got. And of course, from a globalist Western perspective, you would say he's the bad guy. That's why he's the evil dictator. But was China good in the 90s? It's like, it's a bit of a contradiction. We look at this stuff and we look at who Xi has been rolling up over the last 10 years. And it's the same type of people that Trump and Putin are both after in their respective countries.
Right. And that's one of the important things, because a lot of the haters of Xi, like the readers of Epoch Times, which is run by the Falun Gong, or the Miles Guo, who just got thrown in the can in an American, he got arrested. I think he's facing upwards of like 30 years in prison for defrauding his supporters of like $1 billion, saying he was going to do all of these great things to overthrow the Chinese government and bring in democracy, but he was just pocketing all of it, buying yachts. So it's interesting to me that there's actually something in the U.S. that took action on this guy who had a huge media presence, but the way that they would often they would try to capture the fact, this empirically objective fact of Xi's arrests during the Tigers and Flies campaign since 2012, and they'd say, "Oh yeah, look, he's just crushing. It's just proof that he's a tyrant, crushing his Democratic opponents." But it's like, okay, sure, let's see what they're doing. And like, if you actually take a list of the key Tigers, the big players that have faced justice, that have gotten the death sentence, in some cases life sentence in prison, and you just go through the list, as I've done in my book on breaking free of anti-China psyops. These are all people who are all behind perestroika, liberalization, privatize everything. They were all the ones working with Goldman Sachs. They were and we're talking like the former Minister of Justice, 2 former heads of the Chinese version of the CIA, the state security.
They all
complex.
worked with the Bush and Clinton regimes to globalize.
They're all working with
the U.S.
and Obama and Henry Paulson. Like Henry Paulson, again, Cynthia's doing this incredible essay that she's about to publish by tomorrow or so, on Paulson's operations in China and building up this complex. And he was there like 70 times before he even became Treasury Secretary. This guy worked for the Pentagon. He worked for the Pentagon first under the Nixon administration. He worked for the U.S. security complex tied to these Stargate things, and then he became the head of Goldman Sachs. And then when Obama promises that he's going to rein in the banking system because look at what Goldman Sachs and the Lehman Brothers and all of these like too big to fails did to create this economic calamity in America under subprimes and derivatives, multiplication games. He was like, that's why he got elected. He got elected to rein it in and bring in regulation, bust up the banks. And the first thing he does, he brings in Goldman Sachs' CEO, Hank Paulson, whose job is to go and try to get China to liberalize even more. And China at that time is like, well, we were going to do that, but we're looking at what's happening to you based on the things you're telling us to do, and it's not looking good. So that caused China to sort of, I think if the U.S. economic collapse hadn't happened in 2008, then it's likely that the enemies of Xi Jinping would have been victorious. Like his core enemies, Bo Xilai was his key nemesis, who was known as the Al Gore of China. He was like going to be the Secretary General in 2012. It wasn't Xi Jinping. And it was just that all of his allies were behind Hank Paulson's Goldman Sachs operations to liberalize China that got enough support from places where it matters in China to say, okay, we're going to put our money behind Xi instead. And Bo Xilai got like 18 years in prison for being a traitor, as he provably was. And his son works for Quebec's Power Corporation with Paul Desmarais, this kind of like the Quebecois Rockefeller. So, the
irony though, Matt, is the guys you're referencing there, just to translate this a little bit, like in layman's terms for me, is one of my kind of epiphanies with China is, the guys you're laying out, the victims of the Tigers and Flies campaign, all of the gripes that the American MAGA movement have with China, they're not ridiculous gripes in terms of globalism and all this kind of stuff, right? In terms of being sold out, the American middle class being sold out largely to China and to the globalist vision. The irony, though, of what you're laying out, and what I've been trying to get across, is that the business interests and the people and the organizations and the powers within China that were responsible for this are the people that Xi Jinping has been rolling up for the last 10 years, right? It's like, that's why it can be so difficult to square these things. And one of the ways I often try to translate that to the MAGA audience is it's like, hey, you MAGA audience, you think there's an American deep state. So if you're in China or in Russia, you probably don't have a good view of the US. But if you were over there, if you're in Russia, the United States takes credit publicly for overthrowing a duly elected leader in the Donbass and committing a genocide or facilitating a genocide in the Donbass on behalf of Western intelligence, essentially, right? So if you're talking to a Russian from an American perspective, you don't open up with, don't criticize the CIA, you would probably try to find common ground with the Russian and say, I know what you're saying, but that's not the new guy, right? We're against that. And that's it. But they don't extend that to China. They don't extend that to the Xi regime, right, even though they've been rolling up all of these people. One of my little sub theories on Trump and Xi and why I think there's coordination there is I've said, the trade war between them over the last couple of years hasn't affected the governments so much as these globalist companies, especially American companies, that have been basically relying on this Chinese slave labor to put $900 iPhones in Americans' pockets. And that's a reductive way of looking at it. But, it's almost, I almost look at that as they fight this trade war, but Xi and Trump are both essentially chasing globalist oligarchs out of China and forcing them to reshore with a lot of what they're doing.
Yeah. Well, I think, I wrote a paper back in 2020 on could a reasonable decoupling be a good thing for Russia and for China and the United States. And if your intention is to get out of this parasitic relationship of dependency and actually build proper full-scale, full-spectrum economies, then this is a perfectly good thing, because it's an unnatural arrangement that the U.S. was put into to have all of their manufacturing exported so that they could have this new consumer society. We won't produce what we consume type of model that George Shultz and Kissinger hoisted onto the American people as a big psyop back in the 70s, but that really got off the ground in the 80s. That was never a natural arrangement, and China was not supposed to be they did what they could. They learned what they could learn about, getting quick industrial, getting manufacturing, learning how this works. But to be the slave labor, exporter of cheap goods to Western consumers that you generally as a Chinese people have to remain too poor to afford to purchase the things that you're making. While the Americans stay too useless to produce the things that they're consuming. It's a culture of just total dependency, where the only people with levers of power are the middlemen in between, who are not productive but have gained control over banking, over intelligence, and the Bilderberg crowd in the supranational sphere. They laugh and they win. But if you want to get back to a proper healing and building of a healthy parity of consumers and producers in both China as well as in the United States again. So if that intention is there, then decoupling done well is definitely what's needed for sure. And then that way you could actually have trade that is fair trade, where you're paying the Chinese for goods that we don't produce as Americans or Canadians. We're able to buy things from them, but such that their wages are good, their labor is high quality, and vice versa. They can even buy things from us that are finished goods that they don't make, and pay fairly. It's fair trade. It's not free trade. It's fair trade. It's better. That's good. So man, I my heart is definitely aligned with what you're saying, and I hope that you're right. Otherwise, it could get ugly. But But until then, you want to talk about the City of London and
Now that I've spent your entire appearance talking about table setting on China. Anyway, the China stuff's great stuff. I mean, but I've got two major things I wanna get to with this. So let's start with what is the actual in terms of the City of London, and by that, I don't mean the British Empire and its role in the deep state and all this kind of stuff. I mean, in the truth community, especially in the United States, there is an appeal to the City of London and how the City of London is itself almost separate from the British Empire. It's this power projection apparatus that has a long history of power in shadow politics and shadow government, maybe Prussian government, that still to this day maintains influence, maintains some sort of covert power structure. How would you sum up when people reference the City of London, before we go into maybe why that's in the truth community right now? I think that's a separate discussion, but just on an actual level, there's something there. How would you kind of describe that in a way people can understand?
Well, you're right. There's a lot of truth to it. but it could get overly simplistic at the and a much more nuanced appreciation for the nature of the beast could be lost as we choose to focus on this simplistic sort of syllogism of the British Empire as the enemy image we give all of our attention to. That being said, there's a lot of truth to it, and the British. I'm fully convinced the British Empire did not disappear after 1945, as it got rebranded into a Commonwealth. The empire still exists. No empire voluntarily dissolves itself without another darker agenda at play. That was even that in people. It's even the case with the Soviet Union. People would be like, "Oh, but the Soviet Union voluntarily dissolved themselves under Gorbachev." No, not really, because Gorbachev was an asset of Lawrence Rockefeller and the Esalen Institute, as was Boris Yeltsin as well, who so-called came after him, but who was brought to Big Sur, California, to be a part of these Esalen brainwashing sessions in the 1970s and 80s. And Lawrence Rockefeller was the funder of the what's called the U.S.-Soviet Friendship Committee from Esalen. So they had basically built up two Esalen complexes in the Kremlin, or in Moscow and St. Petersburg, as well as parallel to what was in California. That was tied to the SRI, the Stanford Research Institute. So these guys were artificially zombies built in, created as assets by Lawrence Rockefeller inside of Russia that were then situated to then unplug the Soviet Union. And I'm not saying the Soviet Union was a good thing. I'm not saying that it was even like fit to survive the long term, but that wasn't even a voluntary dissolution in that sense either. There was this other higher sulfuric agency that had decided at that moment that things were going to go in a different direction, and the end of history, as Francis Fukuyama had said in 91, had arrived. The New World Order the time had come for accepting the new phase of our migration into this New World Order post-nation state system. So the same thing for the British Empire.
Putin had something to say about that a little
until
bit.
Putin, they didn't flush this nationalist grouping around Primakov who protected one of his core talents, which was Putin. But the British Empire always exerted its influence onto the world through principally occult intelligence, as well as through the intelligence operations that did have an occult overlap is key, and banking, which also they have it was called the Hellfire Club back in the 18th century for a reason. It was a satanic society that, like, the entirety of the executive branch of the British government were all members of the Hellfire Club. So there's that. They did call themselves a Commonwealth, but if you look at the levers of control and of influence over money laundering, offshore accounts, it's still the British Cayman Islands, it's still the Isle of Man, it's still the Virgin Islands. That's where a lot of the shell companies that are used as bases of operations to build up the deep state structures inside of other countries.
So it's largely banking, right? Is it a lot of this is a lot of the conspiracy world? When I say that, by the way, I'm not being pejorative. I hope people understand that. When I'm saying conspiracy world, we all know that that's real, real conspiracy. But is the idea basically that the City of London, their role in this globalist cabal criminal network, anti-sovereign, anti-nationalist, anti-human, as a lot of your commentary is about, that a lot of their role is in the financial realm, kind of a shadow version of the East India Company, like all the way back from that legacy?
Yeah.
Or is that a little...
No, it's both banking, and it is tied to, I think, a lot of the structures. I mean, the East India Company was sort of dissolved in 1873, but the structures didn't dissolve, just the name and the branding did, and then it was given over to different institutions more. But again, it was the same. They spent 2 centuries building up this power complex. It doesn't disappear. It's just simply given a new fate, a new veneer. I would say there is. Okay, how do I word this in the most concise way?
Well, because this show is known for being concise, so it's important.
All right, so I don't have to stress about being too concise. Okay.
Yeah.
So the British Empire the city of London itself is a power, still to this very day, and through things like the livery companies, which were built up during the Norman invasion, about a millennia ago. The Norman invasion was sort of this Viking takeover of England and the introduction of feudalism into England. When the Normans came in, they brought in with them feudalism that they'd already built up in the south of France, or the western side of France, where they'd already spent about a century building up their capacities, their power structures there before being sent and deployed into England, simultaneously also into the south of Italy, where you also had the Norman kings that endured for several centuries in Italy and that oversaw the Crusades. In the case of England, same thing. So with that, the power of the city of London, which was, and I would say this is before the British Empire, right? The British Empire doesn't even exist yet, not even close. It's still, we're not even at the Crusades yet, but this is what is behind the launching of the Crusades. It's this Frankish war, this clash of civilizations. It is very religiously motivated around the idea of creating this sort of like restoration of Solomon's temple. That's where the Knights Templar had set up their headquarters. But what the Templar Knights began to do as a mystery cult, I would say it's really, when people say it's a satanic order, I think it's probably true. There was probably a certain initiatory
bit of an inversion, right?
Yeah, I think there's a certain witch coven aspect to the Templar Knights that acted on the surface to be Christian, but were actually this more Mithraic cult, a Gnostic Mithraic kind of cult of kill for Jesus types, but with an initiatory system. And they were doing black magic on the inside, it seems. But they also innovated banking. They became the primary controllers of international finance. So the idea was, their influence became so great in the Middle East and Turkey and Anatolia, all the way up through different parts of Europe. And they were given such powers by the Pope that they could, even recruit into their order. Like their order was super independent, kind of like what the Jesuits enjoyed later on is what the Templars enjoyed earlier before the Jesuits. Total independence. They could recruit heretics to their cause. They could bring them up to the highest levels of the order. They were given that kind of authority. But because they had also tons of money, like they were given castles, controls over land interests, farming, treasuries. I mean, they were collecting their own taxes. They had a huge amount of assets, and a lot of they were taking in money. They were selling like armor and supplies as well. So they had like a whole outfit, a whole economy built up around the Crusades. And they had little banking outlets in like Palestine, and they had like so many banking outlets that they began to realize, hey, we could have different types of bills that somebody could deposit in one branch, and then with a special seal, take out the same amount of money from another branch. So they innovated that kind of
trust, if you will.
Yes. And they began to lord over nations. So they started exerting influence over the nations of Europe as a whole to get more, because war is money, and they started finding different ways of encouraging new crusades, completely unnecessary, but very lucrative new crusades. They also controlled the ports of the Mediterranean increasingly. So they became known as like the vanguard of the pirates, a lot of these Templars. So one of the key control centers that they had was the city, this square mile that everybody has probably heard about, which was at the hub of Roman Londinium. So when the Roman Empire came in and created Roman Londinium, there was this Celtic Isis cult, and their headquarters of this Isis cult was in the location of what became the city of London as a banking complex. But it's an occult initiatory control center. A sister center was in Paris, which is why it's called Paris as a name. It's from Para Isis, those from Isis, that's why there's all this weird occult symbology all over France, and the Olympics were a great display of that. But
oh my god, that was, I mean, even if you're a normie at this point, holy shit, you'll be watching that being like, what is going on here? Why am I watching some Stanley Kubrick?
Big naked blue guy with kids, and it was just
bit on the nose.
A little too much too fast. So you have this thing, and within the Magna Carta in 1215, these Norman conquerors, these former Viking overlords who were brought in as kind of like, these are like, think of the way the CIA uses ISIS as a battering ram to destroy nations we don't like
Yeah.
everywhere in the Middle East.
And then as a
And then,
predicate to invade those nations to combat ISIS. It's a perfect
ironic,
wrap-up
right?
smear. It's a great invention by Intel.
That's largely what the Normans were. They were largely deployed as kind of like marcher lords to just destroy the enemies of at the time. You know, the a lot of the forces of the old Roman Empire, the old families, were being concentrated in some of the areas of Italy. Some of these proto city states like Amalfi, Venice was on the ascendancy. Genoa was on the ascendancy, and they didn't like some of the reforms that were then being made by King Alfred Great in England. They didn't like some of the reforms that were being made by some of the aristocracy in the south of Italy. They didn't like that because they were actually trying to protect the people from this ancient satanic order that, again, that oversaw that ran Rome into the ground, and that regrouped itself in these core city states that I just mentioned: Amalfi, Venice, Genoa. Florence was not really on the game board back then. But so they said, okay, well, there's this really useful tribal group of Vikings that have nominally become Christian on the surface, but they've never been Christian, and they're good at breaking things, and we'll send them into these countries to get rid of the people who are causing us trouble within the Anglo-Saxon groupings around King Alfred and within Italy. And they did that. And then they were rewarded by being granted this stewardship. So they became sort of the new oligarchy, the new families, and things like the Doomsday Book of King William the Conqueror was then created. He literally called it the Doomsday Book because the idea was that in all of the families, he branched up all of the parcels of land and castles and things of England and its tributaries, and said, okay, my different allies who helped me will get different parcels of these lands, of these castles, until the Book of Revelation, until Doomsday, until the end of the world. And it's still called the Doomsday Book, and you could read the family names, and many of them were positioned to be into this institution that was representing the various guilds of the fisheries, the different livery guilds. I forget how many there are. I think there's like 12, maybe there's 13. And these guilds became very like independent, almost independent, but overlapping corporations that represented the governance of the city itself, the city of London, the square mile. And it within the Magna Carta, there was enshrined within it the demand that the king will always be obedient to the perfect independence of the city as something which will be above the laws of the state, which still is respected to this very day, which is why they have their own private judiciary. It's not the English judiciary. It's something very specific to the city. They got their own police force, their own. It's weird. They got their own remembrancer, this guy who's got total control in parliament to go to anybody and see what their legislation is. He can just walk around. He's called the remembrancer. It's weird. Yeah, it's fucked up.
For that?
I don't know. You definitely have to make something bleed in a dark room somewhere, I think.
But that though is reference. You know, some people in chat who have talked about this or at least read about this in general. Again, in the context of sort of the truth community, there's this broad idea that in the current, I mean, we would agree that while, I mean, earlier we said the U.S. government is not a monolith, the Chinese government is not a monolith, the deep state is not a monolith either. And I think that sometimes we get a little tricked into that. You know, once the veil is lifted a bit and you realize that there are people that don't necessarily belong to nation states or don't feel themselves as belonging to nation states, operating in the shadows, maybe against the will of sovereign people. You're like, that's the deep state. That's the bad guys. That's the team. But, you know, I often think of it, and myself and Chris Paul often frame it as a little more akin to something like Game of Thrones, where even within the deep state, you've got these interests that are overlapping and competing, and just like any criminal organizations, right?
A great example of that was in the London fire in 1666. something really weird happened right after the English Civil War, because before America, England was the first republic where they got the head of their king off, King Charles I. They cut his head off. They created a republic, but it was very messy, very messy. It was all full of Jesuit and Rosicrucian infiltrators. So it was not very easy to govern. A lot of people who were good people didn't understand the terrain. They fell into traps left and right, and the thing petered out after like a decade. And it accompanied a civil war. It was a good time for the American colonies, though, because Britain at that time became so occupied with its own shit that they just created a breathing space for the Massachusetts Bay Colony and the Patriots in America to start building up some capabilities of their own who could qualify themselves for having.
Matt. They were scared of the Bostonians the whole time.
They were.
Yep.
But okay, so what happened right afterwards? 1666. The Civil War has ended. The experiment of the English Republic kind of ends. Charles II is brought in now. I think it's a Stuart King. Yeah, it's a Stuart King. Is brought in, and immediately the city of London catches fire, and like 90% of the city of London, the square mile, burns to the ground. And they do to this very day. It's really bizarre, but there's an annual parade in London, and people can Google. If you're listening to this right now, Google the parade of Gog and Magog in London, and you will find some weird shit. And
we are not responsible for whatever lists you may or may not end up on for Googling that, but so Google that of your own volition.
Yeah, good disclaimer. But it's civilians are there, kids. It's a fun thing, and there was these two giants, one called Gog, the other Magog, and one giant you'll find typically is portrayed with a shield, and a fire with a phoenix coming out of it is on one of the shields, and that is an homage to the fire of the city of London, which they say was a purgative cleanse, where something was eliminated in the city of these, which is where the livery companies were based. Out of the ashes, something new was created. I don't think that the new thing that phoenixed out of the ashes was good in any way, but it did show that the powers that wielded a lot of influence within the city were also behind, as you pointed out, this kind of like Game of Thrones maneuvering that resulted in the king getting his head cut off, this experiment of the Republic, and they got punished. Whoever they were, they got punished. The thing was torn down and rebuilt, but under a more controlled sort of system. And out of that, the consolidation, again, England wasn't fully an empire yet. That was the dream of people like John Dee and these black magicians who coined the term, or had this idea that England could replace the Spanish and the Portuguese empires to be the new world expression of power of the ancient empires of Babylon. That had always aspired to world control, right? Not a regional, but a world control. That's what Rome also tried to do, but nobody really made it. And the idea was, okay, now England can be the one to do it. We know of the new world as well. We've got colonies. We could be the ones to ice out. We've already beat the Spanish back in 1588, right? We beat the Dutch, or we're beating the Dutch. The Dutch there was still, I think, a bit of a fight over whether the oligarchy was consolidating its interest at that time around the Dutch as well as the English courts. And both of them had a Dutch and an East India Company. So there was a Dutch East India Company and a British East India Company. The Dutch were actually more under the control of this parasite, because they had, in 1609, way before the Civil War, but in 1609, they had brought in the first private central bank modeled on Venice, the Levant Company. So that's what was done in the case of the Netherlands. Just before that, they created the Dutch East India Company to sort of compete with the Portuguese in the East in India and what have you. The British set up theirs a little bit later. And ultimately, when the city of London, when the decision was made that, okay, it won't be the Netherlands, it could have been as the seat of the new empire. Instead, it was made England. That choice was made, and there was about 30 years of battles of war between the Dutch and the English, from like 1611 all the way up until 1670s, when they finally merged. And that's when you had sort of the creation of the Anglo-Dutch system. This agreement, okay, England will be the center control, the Netherlands will be our sort of support, and together we will do the thing. And that was consolidated with the 1688 takeover of William of Orange. The Dutch king didn't even speak a word of English, but he was the guy selected to be brought into England as part of the Glorious Revolution. And as soon as he was brought in, there's a book that's super influential for my thinking by Graham Lowry, who was with the Schiller Institute back in the 80s. He died in 2001, but he did a book called How the Nation Was Won, and he goes through this in excruciating detail of the Venetian party of Lord Marlborough, the great grandfather of Winston Churchill. His grandfather was the leader, the great grandfather. I'm not going to do that every time. We'll say Great Seven or something like that.
Old guy.
Yeah, he was the head of the Venetian party with Sarah Churchill, his wife, who oversaw this, who facilitated the takeover. At which point the Stuarts had to flee. The Stuarts, I think it was James II, had to flee to France. He was given sanctuary, and the Dutch William of Orange was brought in. And at that point, the Dutch central bank, which was itself a Venetian bank, set up in 1588, which itself was a Templar bank. It was built around the Templar innovations earlier on, but it was magnified under Venice. The Knights of Malta were a big player in that Venetian operation. The Knights of Malta were very closely tied to Venice at this point. So the Knights Templar disappeared, but they went underground when they were persecuted. But the Knights of Malta, they weren't called that then. They were called something else. The Knights of St. John of Jerusalem. But they were then brought into play a little bit more and they acquired a lot of the Templar assets, and they started working very closely with Venice. So all that to say, this Venetian central banking system was brought into first the Netherlands, then in 1695 it was brought into England. So it was this private central banking model with a very opaque ownership. Basically interests who represented this old money were brought in to manage this new thing. And there was still, some pushback. There were still some better Englishmen in power at the time who didn't want it to go in this direction, but they had too little power. They tried a little bit under Queen Anne, but when she died in 1710, William of Orange was prolifically unwilling to have intercourse with a woman. So he couldn't have any kids. And Queen Anne didn't have any kids. Or she had like 13 kids. They all died before the age of 2. So they're all being poisoned. Yeah, it was bad. Ugh. And so she was giving some protection for some really good people around Jonathan Swift, who was an official in her government, the guy who was like polemicizing against, depopulation under his modest proposal. This guy was like a political player, powerhouse from Ireland. And but when she died, all of these guys got purged completely from any position of power, and then the empire was kind of consolidated under George I, this Hanoverian king. Who was sort of under the weird, lineage, hereditary structures that they maintain in Europe. For some reason, the Hanoverian line was going to be the next in succession if Anne didn't have a kid, which she didn't. She was a Tudor, no kid. So then that created the George II, George III, the Mad King, and with Victoria, you had the Saxe-Coburg Germanic line also introduced on top of the Hanoverian lines into England. But all that to say, these are just the bloodlines. A lot of these people, they're totally disposable, as Mad King George III was disposable.
Well, you mentioned this word, and it's very amenable to how this audience sees things, which is parasite. And there's I don't know if you're familiar with the Prussiagate series on Substack. That's an interesting rabbit hole there. You mentioned William of Orange. They talk about how that started their dig into the Prussians and sort of the Prussian Empire, and how that never really dissolved, and a lot of similarities to what you're talking about with England, or London. But the bottom line, I think, is, there is something there. There is something in terms of there is this enemy, Trump might call it the invisible enemy, that is extra national. It's not, they don't have any loyalty to a government. They certainly don't have any loyalty to a people. And this is old. A lot of the stuff that you write about is mystery cults. And what's the point of these? It's to leverage power. It's for a small group of people to lever power and influence over nations and nation states, and maybe even leaders themselves. And I know you got to get going soon, but one of the things here that some people in the chat have said, and I've seen this in the sort of American conspiracy world in particular, is this idea that this cabal, this deep state, this cult, the sort of however unified they are, the invisible enemy kind of has these three main pillars that people conflate or align with specific areas. So there's the City of London, there's the Vatican, and there's DC, Washington, DC. And there's these theories of City of London is the financial architecture of this cabal. The Vatican is the religious and spiritual architecture of this cabal. DC is the backdoor into the kinetic military aspect of the cabal. I wonder what you think of that. I mean, for my 2 cents, I think it's way too reductive. Yeah. I understand that it may be communicating a larger, broader truth, which is that perhaps the financial architecture of what we call the deep state, or the Western globalist hegemon is often what I call them in my writing. Maybe that's concentrated in the remnants of the British Empire. I certainly agree that the kinetic arm, what has been the kinetic arm of the deep state, has been the U.S. military, levered basically against our best interests. And then, the Vatican has its own conspiracies. But I think that's a lot of where the City of London rhetoric from an American conspiracy theorist perspective comes in, where people kind of have this idea, I think, that I'm not trying to poo-poo it, maybe there's something to it, but that they're like, they're the ones who handle the corrupt banking finance, and then the DC is the evil military guys. But I don't know. What do you think of that framework?
I think maybe on a structural level, there's a degree of truth in the model on a certain level, but I think, like you said, it could get very reductive very quickly at the expense of the subtleties, the nuance, which is where truth often resides. You could point out and look at the origins of the obelisks in St. Peter's Square within the Vesca Pisces, and look at the architect who was assigned to do that and which pope particularly wanted that at which point. And you can map out a certain cult.
Then you've got the DC obelisk, right?
Which is like 1833, and you can look at who set that thing up, and what that was. Most Americans were confused when they had a competition of like which artist could submit a model for like George Washington as an homage, because they never did that. And they're like, well, it's been 35 years since he died. It's about time, isn't it? And they would just put out a commission to all of the artists to come up with ideas, and the guy who gets the win from this like 4-person council, who's in this 4-person council, is this guy who comes up with an obelisk. And everyone's confused. Most people are like not happy with this, but it won the thing, and it gets set up. So it's a statement of intention. And then you have the Vesca Pisces in 2004 imposed onto it to model it on what's done in the Vatican in St. Peter's Square. And if you look at an aerial view of the Washington, obelisk, it's right in the middle of the Vesca Pisces. So it's got this occult significance between this convergence of opposites of the male and the female sexual organs, which is the Lani and the Lingam. The Yoni and the Lingam is the another name for the Vesca Pisces, which is basically 2 circles overlapping. And if you put the phallus symbol there, that's the sort of significance. It's really big in the occult circles. So, and then you've got similar things in England. If you look at the river Isis, which is the river Thames, I think they say. I always call it Thames, but then a lot of English people write to me and they say, no, you're doing it wrong. I think it's Thames. If you go, it's called the river Isis. It's been called that for like over a millennia. And right in the 1860s, there was installed from these obelisks from Alexandria, right next to these 2 sphinxes, which was also a hub of the Theosophists when they set up shop. They created their first sort of organization, first in New York and then right there in London and then in Adyar in India. So there is like structurally a certain degree of truthiness to some of this, but there's battles that are missed. Like if you look at any of these places, how many popes have been assassinated who are working very valiantly with various bishops and cardinals against this Jesuit, weird occult agency, or more recently in the 20th century when John I the Pope was trying to like audit and rein in the Vatican Bank that was only created in the 1920s. He dies in 2 seconds. You've got the Godfather 3 movie was actually premised on some of that material.
We just did that a couple weeks ago. We did the whole Godfather trilogy.
Did you?
I had not seen it. Yeah, somehow.
Yo,
I had never seen it.
Yeah, but now you saw it.
Yep.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, pretty wild.
Yeah, they got the P2 Lodge in there as well, like the Propaganda Duo Lodge. So, and I think a lot of that is limited hangout stuff. But anyway, it's real info. So there's a lot of good men. There's a culture of genuine, authentic Christianity within the institutions of Rome, and you got a big dead body trail of people who rose to positions of a lot of influence, and who picked a fight, who did a lot of good at different times, sponsored very good initiatives that elevated that protected the poor, that against this vicious class, that sponsored beautiful Renaissance initiatives, artistic and musical and architectural innovations, which were fantastic. You got that, and then you got this other darker thing, battling it out. And the same thing for the American presidents who died while in office. And I've written a whole 4-volume book series going through all of those different presidents and what are they doing. All 8 American presidents dying while in office, they're all invoking the same principles of constitutional banking, domestic and international. They're picking fights with the same continuous agencies. And their enemies are still incubating as a fifth column in America that represents the old Habsburg, British, old families of Europe that have their infiltrations. I mean, it was called New Amsterdam, right? In the colony days. And if you look at it, like a lot of the original witch covens, and a lot of innocent people got persecuted during the witch hunt days. That was crazy talk. That was a crazy time. But there were real infestations of witch covens too. That was the thing too, and a lot of this was from the
there was
Dutch.
Some shenanigans going on.
there was the Maria Abramovich spirit cooking shit didn't come out of a vacuum. That is a lineage.
Yeah.
And babies were going missing for a reason in these villages in Europe, in Bohemia, and in Connecticut and Boston, and people didn't know what to do about that. Some of them went crazy and went Puritan Inquisitor mode. That was bad. But certain people like Cotton Mather and Increase Mather and John Winthrop Jr. were doing their best to try to find a middle ground to deal with this infestation, as well as the crazy fundamentalists. And they did what they could, though ultimately they didn't extract it completely. So for me, when I look at it's the British Empire, I'm like, well, yeah, but that doesn't mean it doesn't mean what people think it means. It's this it's a much more complex tapestry,
right?
Of it's associated with it.
And I know we could, and I gotta, I don't want to keep you here for 3 hours, but of course I spent the first hour asking you about China, but I hope people enjoyed that. The last kind of little mini section here that I want to get into, and I have to have you back on to get deeper into this stuff, but is what you just kind of led into there. So, when I called this the PsyOp of London, it's not because I don't think there's anything to it. It's because of what you just said there. I think there's a danger I think there's a reasonable, understandable instinct where people want the thing, right? They want the answer. They want to know not just what the truth is, but maybe in this world, you want to know who's the bad guy, who's the enemy, the deep state, even words like that, even terms like that we use as shorthand at times. You should be using those terms as shorthand while understanding that they are shorthand for a complicated topic, right? And I think too many people start going the deep state, they've got a fantasy roster on, right? And I think that's how people think of it, where they're Mark Carney's in the deep state and Hillary Clinton's in the deep state. And this person is this rank and this person is this rank. And they all go to George Soros's house for lunch on Sundays. And it's some of them, sure. But a lot of them really don't like each other. Lest you forget, the Clintons and the Obamas are mortal political enemies, even though I basically consider them to be part of the same team. And I think that's part of what's going on here. So with the City of London thing, the reason I wanted to bring it up, and I don't need to mention the group, but I've noticed in 2025 and definitely in 2026, there has been a very directed push into the alternative spheres of American political conversation, specifically the truth community, Badlands, these sort of alternative YouTube channels. There is one group in particular that's pushing this a lot, but I'm seeing it in Badlands Substack comments, in my Substack comments. I'm not saying it's not none of it's earnest. There's a lot of people watching this show who are interested in this stuff, who watch some of these YouTube videos and Twitter videos, which are written by AI, by the way. But it really just started getting me thinking, okay, a lot of what you've talked about tonight, and we could go hours on this, is obviously there's something there. There's something to the origins of what we call the deep state, of what we call the invisible enemy, that has some of its roots, at least, in the city of London and some of these architectures, right? But I find it strange that there's this 2025 and 26 push within sort of the MAGA truth community to relate everything Donald Trump is doing, everything Putin is doing, everything Xi is doing, everything bad in the US and beyond to this city of London. That's who the bad guys are. That's who we're trying to take out. So a couple, questions sort of to end on is, have you noticed this push, being more or less amplified than in the past? Because I didn't notice it in the past. And then the secondary point would be, what do you think that is? Do you do you think it's earnest? Do you think there's just incentive structures to it that are not all that nefarious? Or are there potential darker readings of why you might be pushing something like that?
I know some of those people, and I actually was involved with an organization for 10 years, which was a good 10-year experience in my life, with Lyndon LaRouche, up until 2016. So I'm very, very familiar with the personalities, with the organization, and in broad terms, the overarching moral principles I also share. The aspirations to bring back this American system, that's good. To help define that the American deep state isn't specifically, authentically American per se. It is part of this other entity that was more tied to the British Empire. But I find it is also too reductionist. And when I hear some of the representatives of that group speaking today in their narratives that have gone very viral, like some of their videos get millions.
YouTube and Twitter, I mean, millions of impressions.
It's quite something.
Platforms.
The algorithms are jacking them up.
Oh yeah.
And they're and they split off from another. They used to be one organization. They split off into two back in 2021 or 2022 or something. And the other group, which I find has actually got a more competent tactical analysis of the world, they get like 500 views on their videos. So it's something weird going on. They're messaging. It's not like, I get it if you got maybe half the views, but they're getting like under 1,000, and the other group is getting millions. So there's something that wants that kind of narrative to be very, very amplified.
Can you discern what you think? Why would that be? Like, I guess if there is something pushing that narrative that is beyond just monetary incentive structures of making things go viral, what apparatus would want that sort of narrative to go viral?
There is an encouragement of sloppiness in thinking from people who get too drunk on this type of narrative that I find that will always immediately find a very bland way to justify anything happening. So when the bombing, for example, when the bombing of Iran began, I'm much more sympathetic to the type of hypothesizing that Gordon put forth pertaining to the idea of a sovereign alliance, that a lot of this is at the best. I'm not saying I agree with that even, but I'm saying I'm much more sympathetic to that.
It's a framework you can at least, engage
with.
And
there's something kind of fake about it. I agree. And that betrays a deeper coordination going on behind the scenes. Because it's pretty clearly, there's a lot of fakery from the Lego videos, which are called videos, but it's all just too theatrically composed.
Strange,
right?
Yeah.
But instead of thinking about hypothesizing what's going on behind the surface appearance, they immediately will find ways to spin facts to justify why that's good, why it's great that we're bombing Iran, or that
Right.
because Iran is the city of London, is one of the early
Right.
narratives that I saw coming out of that group. Is London, the IRGC is the city of London.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's never proven. If you ask any of them, and I've watched many of the videos to like try to find, I was with them for like 10 years. I read their literature, I read
Yeah.
their research on Iran and its history. Not once did I ever find it, has anybody ever proven to me that Iran is the city of London. I know that London played a role in the revolution 79, but I've seen a lot, like all of the evidence point to the fact that those operatives have been purged decades ago, and there's nothing that backs that up. But they were saying that that's good, and that, you know, Trump, this is the cutting off of the head of the Hydra. And they just like play into the surface narratives without going deeper, and they encourage their audience to just like lay blame to this easy villain image that it's not us. There's nothing inside of us to work on, right? There's nothing. The fault is not with us in any way, but rather in this very, very simple. It's the British Empire. That's what it is. Everything you don't like, everything that's bad, is the British Empire, and then anybody that we do something bad to,
it's
is the British
justified
Empire
because they're the British Empire.
Yeah, like why is Trump, supporting busting up the BRI, because the BRI is part of the British Empire all of a sudden.
Right.
And it's like they didn't think that 2 seconds ago. It's only when we start bombing some infrastructure that's tied to the BRI in Iran that all of a sudden Iran is like, you could like the information is rewired. So things like that are just, I find, an encouragement of a slave-like way of thinking if people get into the habit of that kind of simplistic reductionist blame game stuff without thinking about the nuance. And also, again, taking personal responsibility for the fact that we yes, the fate, like Shakespeare said, the fault is not fully in our stars, but in ourselves, that we are underlings, right? So we did kind of acquiesce and give consent over generations to this kind of corruption to seep in, both into our intelligence services, but also into our culture. A lot of the cultural things that influence our hearts as a culture. It's kind of like Idiocracy, right? The Mike Judge movie. It's like, yeah, there are bad people that convinced us to replace water with Gatorade, and we're wondering why the crops aren't growing. But at the same time, we kind of went along with that, and we have to like self-reflect and self-examine so we can like become healthy people again. And if you don't have that kind of thing going on, you're just going to get another tyrant. You're just going to get another fascist if the people's instincts and their powers of discernment are so degraded that they will always go with Gatorade instead of water. Yeah, you can get rid of the whole list of all of the bad guys of this deep state. Get the list, knock them off. Imagine that could even happen, though it can't. But just imagine you do that.
Right.
Well, the next
that evil is just gone, right? We won. Huh? There's no.
Yeah,
it's over.
No.
Yeah. Yeah. By the way, you sound like a man who needs his electrolytes. I think you don't believe in electrolytes, is what I'm getting out of that. Yeah, I mean, my cards on the table. This group in particular. I think you laid that out reasonably. Where my conspiratorial mind goes is when the group pushing a certain narrative is a political action committee. I just go, what's going on here? I look at that. Well, like if it's just a YouTube channel or Rumble channel like Badlands or something, and saying, hey, people really like this, and people click on this, and people like this theory, and they like everything relating to this theory. Okay, incentive structures, financial incentive structures make sense to me. When I see that there's a political action committee that is behind the YouTube channel and the Twitter channel, that is just every single thing on the internet now is the City of London, I go, who is directing this kind of leaning and saying, this is the new branding, we're going all into this as part of a election-related thing? So I don't have an answer to that. It's just, for anybody that's watching the show, or for anybody that subscribes to the Badlands Substack, and I get the comments from people that I see in the chat, people that I know are longtime Badlanders. There's certainly, by the way, another tell for me on a negative angle is when I see names that I've never seen before over the last few months just coming in, and all they're doing is pumping me full of links to this group. I go, why is this group spinning up sock accounts when their viewership dwarfs our viewership? To your point, Matt, they're doing like 5-10 times what our viewership is. Why do you need my audience? Why are you coming into my comment section? Why are you in my Substack? Why are you trying to spread everything in there? If you're getting millions of views and subscribers on YouTube and on Twitter and on all the channels we're not allowed on, I'm just not quite sure what's there. So, I think this was a table setter more, and we can obviously have deeper conversations on this in the future. But it's not for anybody wondering. I'm not saying, oh, there's nothing to the city of London. There's nothing to this. But as Matt pointed out tonight, anytime you're trying to kind of lead all roads to this one end game, and then you understand that the group that is trying to lead you to this end game is being funded specifically to do that, I just wonder why. I wonder where that's coming from.
I think what I was mentioning about, as well, when I look at the occult operations and the transhumanist, me, I don't like transhumanist. Transhumanists. I don't think anybody watching this show like you don't have. But anyway, the infiltration of this transhumanist cults into Silicon Valley, all of the stuff that gave rise to the same Project Stargate that was abusing children in the 70s and 80s as an extension of MK Ultra. All of that operation is treated as if they're all representatives of that Silicon Valley operation that it concerns the hell out of me as like the spiritual branch of the oligarchy inside of America. People who we're talking about will tend to frame them as if they're all heroes because they're American, but they're not really American. If you look at the ideology, it doesn't come from America. Transhumanism is not an American ideology. What they're trying to do doesn't represent American interest. It represents a slave society of feudalistic techno controls of man-machine integration and total surveillance for everybody with social credit systems, which is what China's been battling to try to keep out of their country, though we're being told China is the purveyor of all of this. It's actually Stargate. It's actually Oracle. It's the CRISPR, mRNA editors that want to like breed a new kind of human around Larry Ellison and company. It's this is the sort of thing that they go out of their way. When I've engaged with representatives of that particular group we're talking about, they go out of their way to create logical backflips to pretend that all of these things shouldn't be looked at. They're just patriots. We shouldn't be concerned about that. And I'm like, dude, you're creating a big weak spot for the resistance. If that's actually what people are going to be believing, that they don't have to look there. Well, if this thing is actually going to light your house on fire, you should be like dealing with these arsonists. So that's another thing. And
that's where my mind goes. And I don't know people's intentions. I look at these patterns and I say, what do you not want me to be looking at? Yeah. Why are you trying to get everything I'm talking about to relate back to this? So anyway, I think it's just interesting to consider. Right before you get out of here, we did have a specific rant that was directed toward you from Boom Diggity, sent over $120 for us tonight. So very much appreciate that. And said, Matt, please touch on how the City of London serves as the largest offshore hub for Chinese currency trading outside of Asia. The China Construction Bank branch acts as the primary UK clearing bank, and the UK GFT map of the 1 square mile City of London and all the Chinese firms in that 1 square mile says a lot. This is what she sent over. I don't know if you have any thoughts on this or not, but Chinese companies doing business in London, Matt. What's your answer? Explain it.
I think China is trying to gain any influence that they can, knowing that they're under attack. And London currently is trying, I think, on the one hand, seduce China. There's an effort right now to try to charm China, to convince China that the opium wars is like, let's let bygones be bygones. You can trust the empire now. Forget about the what we did in Hong Kong, even though Hong Kong is still MI6 of the Pacific, just
right.
And HSBC is still running like 1/3 of the Hong Kong currency, and Britain's Standard Chartered Bank is also controlling the other 1/3 of Hong Kong's dollars. Ignore all of that. We're good now. You could trust us now. And look, Big Bad America is giving us a hard time. They're giving you a hard time. So let's bind together. And so I think there's a bit of a disgusting effort by the part of the British oligarchical caste to try to persuade China to enmesh themselves into Commonwealth interests. They're doing the same thing in Canada too, to try to, in their mind, weaken. Because once you get dependency, when you get any type of economic integration on that level, there's influence that you can have. Now, people are in England are being fed all kinds of propaganda saying, look, this is evidence that China is taking over England. China's the enemy. And British people are getting tons of this kind of messaging left and right.
Yeah.
In my analysis, it's the opposite. The people who have more to be concerned about are the Chinese, because when you allow this type of thing in, you're creating influence in the other direction as well. That's a big deal. Right. So if you look at the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, there is an immense amount of influence with it being expressed within this, sabotaging these things that China created, because they have allowed a seat at the table to interests from the City of London, from Canada. Same thing for the BRICS Development Bank and things like that. Interest from
I was just going to say the new development bank is a very fascinating and I think positive rabbit hole a little bit, because you start to look at some of the things they're setting up in the global south and you go, this looks like a sly and roundabout way to go around the Western globalists.
Yeah,
but that's
absolutely.
That's a whole other thing.
That's a whole other thing. Yeah, but and a lot of these things could have been and should have been much stronger institutions for funding, providing credit for building big things around the world, but they've been held back because of sabotage from within. And a lot of that sabotage has a lot to do with the Commonwealth and also the traders from within China as well. There's been a fifth column built into China. That's a factor. And the other thing too is that a lot of the nefarious actors who are Chinese running operations in Canada, for example, there's a big Chinese organized crime network of triads that are a big part with the Khalistani mafia groups. They're both protected by Anglo Canadian intelligence. They're big parts of the entire drug economy and infusing like fentanyl into America and into Canadian cities.
And that though is a huge point, Matt, because that's one of those little indicators for me of these Trump-Xi connections, of where you look at Trump sanctioning Canada based exactly on what you just said of the triads and the fentanyl trade, where you've got the Canadian government talking about, oh, it's not us, we don't have anything to do with that trade, and then Americans in MAGA, to your other point, reducing that to going, it's China coordinating with the Canadians. It's like, well, yes, but it's not the Xi China that's coordinating. Like, most reductive point you could make, there's a reason they're not operating in China. Yeah. Because they're not allowed to be operating over there.
They would be in jail. Exactly. And exactly. And then they're given sanctuary in Canada. They're given sanctuary in Australia and in England. And then ignorant white people who don't know any better are just being told, hey, look, these Chinese are causing housing prices to increase. They must be assets of Xi Jinping, or they're behind these drug production facilities. They're behind Xi Jinping's reverse opium war, and it's that simplistic. So it's again, you got to just be careful what your senses tell you and what the narratives are that you take in to interpret your senses at the end of the day. And thank you for that $120 donation to Burning Bright's cause. This is very nice of you. Thank you.
That's to both of us, so appreciate that. And thank you for hanging out, Matt. Kept you a little longer, as usually happens. I'm going to blame you for that. It's never my fault. This is fun. These are good
Sunday nights. I appreciate this.
We gotta have you back on. Maybe next time, to do a slightly less controversial topic, I'm going to have Matt, because he just hinted at it. We're going to tell you how Hong Kong and Taiwan and all the rest of these damn proxy states need to be dismantled and reabsorbed into the sovereign multipolar empire we're building. I figure that's going to be a less controversial topic, right? So we'll get into maybe I'll talk to Matt on the back channels and see if he wants to get into that topic, but that'd be a fun one. But anyway, man, you've been working on a ton of stuff lately. You said you got a documentary. Is it available for people yet, or what do you got going on? Let people know.
Yeah, they can go to my Substack, and it's called it's the feature post called Black Sun Rising, Esoteric Fascism Past and Present, and it's like an hour and 20 minutes. It's a pretty thorough feature-length film, and that's behind a $5 paywall, but I think it's worth the $5. And if you wait a few weeks, we'll make it free sometime in August. We're also doing an event. That's another thing I would say in Toronto next week, next Saturday. We will screen this documentary at a venue near Toronto, and do a little engagement with the audience. So if there's anybody watching in and around the Toronto area who wants to meet up with Cynthia and myself, and just have an afternoon with a video and conversation, give me a call. You can contact me through either Substack or via my website, canadianpatriot.org. There's a contact me section there, and I'll tell you how to get tickets to that. So
great. MatthewEhret.substack.com. Matt's very active on Substack there. I'm getting his stuff to my inbox pretty much every day.
That's right.
And, so far I've said, no platform is perfect, but I'm a big fan of the Substack platform. They've not taken me down. They've not taken you down.
Not yet, but I'm weary. I'm weary as well.
Yep. Yeah, you never have all the eggs in one basket, but support Matt, support what he's doing over there. Got to have you back on, man. Otherwise, I'll see you next time.
Yeah, all right, man. Bye. Bye, everyone.
All right, thanks to Matt. I spent the first course. My version of intros is an hour long. We talked about China, but I think that's important, and I think the reason I was talking about China to begin with is because obviously the Trump address on Thursday night referenced the CCP, referenced Chinese influence on American elections. Matt obviously knows a lot about that, and when we talked privately before this show, he was talking about kind of how that's even a greasing of the rails into the City of London topic. So we did about half and half there. There's maybe some people watching this show that have not been inundated with this and that have not seen this on their feeds or whatever. Full disclosure, does not shock any of you to know, whenever there's a coordinated push to get me to relate everything to something, or hey, you're missing this giant piece to the puzzle, you're probably pushing me in the opposite direction. And you could say that that's being reductive in itself and that's being contrarian and a hipster or something like that. Fine. But when I start looking into your little group that gets millions upon millions of monthly impressions on X, a problem with trying to farm the audiences of autistic weirdos like me and some of the other people at Badlands is that we will try to figure out everything about your organization, and we're really good at it. So I've only just started, and when you're sending people into my email to invite me onto YouTube channels for interviews, no thanks, by the way, if you're watching, when you're sending people into my Substack comments, when you're creating sock accounts on my shows, when you're going into the Badlands Substack comments and relating every single topic to the City of London, and then any link we click on brings us back to your PAC, your Political Action Committee. And when your Political Action Committee wants to relate everything Donald Trump is doing as a war against the City of London, I don't know. Something a little weird about that. Something a little strange about that. You weren't talking about it in 24, 23, 22, 21. Kind of rebranded. There was definitely a rebranding that went on. Matt mentioned one of the organizations that this organization used to be known as. The reason I'm not mentioning it, guys, I don't really want to send traffic to them. They apparently don't need it, even though they're farming us to try to get you guys to go over there, which also makes you wonder just how real those numbers are over on the old YouTubes and the old Twitters. Why are you farming our audience? The philosopher of Badlands, Chris Paul, once said in a different context about a different group, if the Badlands audience is fake, if the Badlands audience is fake, why are you trying to steal it? That's food for thought for any of these groups out there. And it's food for thought for you guys who are in this audience. They're not after us. They're not after me. They're not after John. They're not after Chris or Ghost or Matt. They're after you. They're after the type of minds that watch shows like this and that engage in discussions like this. And again, I hope we had a little bit of a nuanced intro to a discussion on that topic. There is absolutely something to the City of London and the origins and the Vatican and DC and these extra governmental, extra sovereign territories and infrastructures, etc. Of course there is. This is the whole point of what we talk about, what a lot of you guys have been talking about for years and researching for years. But to try to get us all to say that everything is City of London, I think maybe you've got a branding thing going on, and I think maybe you're a bunch of retards. So that's putting it mildly. Or there's something else going on, and I'm not so sure you're actually a political action committee that has Donald Trump's best interests at heart, nor ours in this community. I am going to show you guys another couple sponsors here, starting with ourselves. Then I'll get out of here pretty quick. We'll go through a couple of rants, and then we'll get going. But I hope you guys enjoyed that. Please support Matt, MatthewEhret.substack.com. He's crazy busy lately doing a lot of that. It was kind of hard to track him down. He used to be able to just scrounge him up, just throw him on the narrative, put him in his narrative cage, and say, 4 hours, you're doing 4 hours this Sunday and 4 hours next Sunday, and that's the way it is. But the man's in high demand these days. So anyway, that was a fun one. So brought to you by ourselves and the lotion detector.
One hero, one mission, to deliver softness to America.
No, Chi-Chi, we can't stop your snacks, dude. We have to deliver all of these soft disclosure gift cards.
He goes by Zach Kane.
The Lotion Detector.
Hey, stop fighting over the beer brush.
Life finds a way.
Hydrate your elbows, moisturize your soul. Feel the rhythm together. You feel alive and let the lotion roll. Soft disclosure, hear the cry. Maximum softness, do or die.
Muffin, hit it.
What a banger. Soft disclosure. It's actually good stuff. That's what's so awesome about it. It's good stuff, and we have the best commercials. The expanding soft disclosure cinematic universe. We are also brought to you by our friends, as usual, at Rumble, specifically Rumble Wallet. We hear a lot about crypto, but here's the part most people miss. Crypto was created so you could actually own and control your money. After the 2008 financial crisis, Bitcoin was designed as an alternative to banks. So instead of a bank holding your money, delaying transfers, or limiting access, you're in control. And if you've ever had to wait for a transfer to clear, you felt that problem. Fast forward to today, everyone's heard of crypto, but getting started still feels complicated. That's exactly why we use Rumble Wallet. It takes all the complexity and makes it simple. Choose what you want: Bitcoin, dollar-backed stable coins, or even digital gold backed by real gold. There's no complicated setup. It connects with MoonPay, so you can use your credit card, debit card, or bank and be up and running in minutes. And once you're set up, you can even support your favorite Rumble creators like Badlands directly. So do this now. Scan the QR code or click the link in the description and download the Rumble wallet. From there, you can set up your wallet, tap buy, and you're in the game in just a few minutes. You can go from hearing about crypto to actually owning some. So thank you to Rumble, thank you to Rumble Wallet, and thank you to those of you who support us using Rumble Wallet. And thank you to Jess for, I would say, co-piloting the stream, but essentially piloting the stream and, dealing with the fact that any estimate I give her on anything I'm doing has never and probably will never be accurate. And yet, nevertheless, she persists. So I appreciate that. Let me grab a few rants here, and then we'll get going. Tom Terrific, 54 cent, $25 over for the cause. Thank you, Tom. Very much appreciated. Jackie and Bay rated me earlier, which is not, that's against my consent. Did not consent to that, but appreciate it nonetheless. Envo, $20. Can't wait to listen tomorrow. Also hope the bathroom is done. Hearing it had some isms. I thought of the Trailer Park Boys where he installed a towel rack and ended up ripping the wall off. Yeah, it'll be done Monday night, I think is the plan. My dad has done a fantastic job. 72 years old. He's just killing it. He did saw through my electrical system, but it just allowed him to recall his electrical wire splicing capabilities. And it all worked out. The bathroom looks awesome. New floors in there. We got like a basin tub, like a soaker basin tub instead of this thing anchored into the wall. New tile in the shower floor. Probably would have been like a $12,000 project, but using my dad as slave labor and then the materials, we're gonna do it for like a fifth of what it would have been. So Mrs. Wright's excited, and I'm excited. So it's good stuff. Thank you for asking. Boom Diggity, thank you for the generous support tonight. Sent over $121 in rants. Very much appreciate that. Nevada Runner gifted 5 subscriptions. So the cones of shame go to Babbage 3, Glenn Housel, Jester of Knights, Maligator 1960, and Woody. Or Woody. You guys got to be more careful than that. Not having a subscription, you might get gifted one. Thank you, Nevada Runner, guys who are now supporters of Badlands. And Babbage sends over $1. Peter Friedrich on YouTube sends $10 and a thumbs up. Thank you. I'm too retarded to be doing that and to have the YouTube thing on at the same time. So thanks for reminding me of that, Babbage. And thank you to Peter Friedrich for sending that $10 over. And anyway, my guy. I'm talking like a Bostonian because, the Red Sox have reeled up. I always knew they were going to do it. They might have sucked a month ago, but 13 straight wins. Biggest Red Sox win streak since 2006. Isn't it crazy that we got 13 straight wins and we're just a hair over 500? That shows how bad they were. Anyway, Red Sox looking good. 4 more wins to break the franchise record. 3 more to tie it. I don't know if they can do it. We got the Baltimore Orioles this week, so we'll see. We'll see what happens there. If you guys are interested in a deep dive, a deep surface level dive into some of the stuff we talked about tonight with China, check out the China version of Righteous Russia on burningbright.substack.com. I named this series Doomed Dynasty when I wrote it in 2022 and 23. Then I compiled it, edited it into a major long form in 2025. This is going to give you a lot of background on Xi Jinping, the CCP, the Tigers and Flies campaign, and how a lot of what's been going on in China preceding even the Trump administration, the two Chinas here, is pretty damn fascinating. And it is a huge white pill and a sovereign alliance pill for you. Got some headlines picked out here. 10 years ago, we got Xi Jinping wrong on his coronation. We should reflect on why. By the way, that's a globalist newspaper saying that they got Xi wrong. China's business elite see the country that let them thrive slipping away. Soros calls China Xi Jinping the greatest threat that open societies face today. He also warns civilization may not survive Putin's war, and he's confident that Trump will be a transitory phenomenon. Talk about reverse indicators, right, guys? The Sultan slug himself, George Soros. Also, if you guys are interested in more of my work, I have brought the Bright Brief out of retirement. burningbright.substack.com. It is totally different than the Badlands Brief. The Badlands Brief features myself and Ash and Ghost Monday through Friday. We do quick hits on a wide range of topics to get you prepped for that day. By the way, the last Badlands Blitz, you get an exclusive Badlands Blitz episode every Saturday morning. The last one was a banger. People enjoyed it. Ash and I talking about how great this Trump disclosure operation is going to be, I think. And again, if you want to go to my Substack, people have been excited that the Bright Brief is back. These are short, for me, features that allow me to kind of dive into topics that I don't necessarily have the time on shows or in my long forms to dive into. One of them was a data in response to viewers asking me to go a little bit more in depth into why I consider the data center boom to be a good thing and the anti-data center push to be a PsyOp. And I got a little sign off there by Donald Trump himself on July 15th when he said data centers are tremendous wins for the states and communities that are lucky enough to get them. Controversial topic. The most popular one this week was called The Men in White Coats. And that was all about Anthony Fauci and the lab leak payback, which a lot of these things going on a little bit beneath the conscious notice of many. but nonetheless, things are moving along. And check that out. You can support me over there if you want. You can support this show. Shoot over a boost if you want, if you're watching this on Monday or Tuesday. Otherwise, thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next Sunday night. Not exactly sure who my guest is yet. Working on that right now. Waiting to hear back from somebody. But should be a fun one either way. And as I always say, the war is a story. The story is a war. Act accordingly and stop, for God's sakes, making everything about the city of London, you whore. We'll see you next Sunday.
We were sleeping. I've been sleeping. I've been turning away from a truth I wanted not to face. There is a wound that won't heal at the center of the galaxy. There is a darkness reaching like rust into everything around us. We let it grow, now it's here.
How many men have you killed, my lord?
I don't know.
50? 100? Countless.
Countless has a nice ring to it.
And how many lives have you saved?
500,000. Population of King's Landing. Tell me if your precious Randy commanded you to kill your own father and stand by while thousands of men, women, children burned alive, would you have done it? Would you have kept your oath then?
Our time has come. We prepared. We grew stronger. While you rested in your cradle of power, you were trusted to lead the Republic. But you were deceived. You assumed no force could challenge you. And now, finally, we have returned.
The visions are clear now. I see possible futures all at once. Our enemies are all around us. And in so many futures they prevail. But I do see a way. There is a narrow way through. It's not a prophecy. It's a story that you keep telling, but it's not their story, it's yours. They deserve to be led by one of their own. What your people did to this world is heartbreaking.
We gave them something to hope for.
That's not hope! We have survived by hiding from them, by running from them. But they are the gatekeepers. They are guarding all the doors, they are holding all the keys, which means that sooner or later, someone is going to have to fight them.
I wish none of this had happened. So do all who live to see such time, but that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. Forgive me. I did not see. I have failed you all. You will bring me. Captain Honor, I do not know what strength is in my net. I swear to you, I will not let the White City fall. Our people failed. Our people. Our people.
I wish you good fortune in the wars to come. And now it begins.
No. Now it ends.